have a lot more who are going to show up. We all know how realtors can be, and we all kind of run a few minutes late, and that is A-okay. My name is Kelsey Razier. If you don't know me, I am the chair of the Governmental Affairs Committee at the Permian Basin Board of Realtors. I don't think I have too many committee members, but if you do sit on the GA committee with me, would you please stand? I will call you out if I see that you're here. There's Jan and Justin. Where's Emily? Laura, you're on it. Okay, I think that's it. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. I get it. Well, thank you all. Thank you to the Governmental Affairs Committee, because thanks to them, we're having this event today. We also are proud recipients of an NAR grant that enabled us to be able to offer this event to you at no charge. So thank you to NAR as well. A couple of just little housekeeping things. You'll see I have, actually Peter put 4 different printouts on your tables. One of them is a QR code. If you scan that QR code, you will be directed to a PDF file that has not only our agenda, but all of our speaker bios. So we aren't going to take the time to read each speaker bio. I've already informed our speakers of that. We have so much that I want to get through and so much I want to cover today that I felt like it would probably be more efficient to just provide that to you guys. If you want to read them, they're right there. Also, early voting is underway. It began yesterday. Election day is 1 week from today. We have some sample ballots as well as polling locations. So please feel free to take a look at those. I think it would be great whenever you leave here at 2 o'clock today to go cast your vote. Right, Karen? Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to call Peter up. He's our association executive. If you have not met him, he is a delight. He's going to come up, finish our intro, and then introduce our first speaker. Thank you, Peter.
I think that's a first. Kelsey Razier, everyone. Let's give her big props for putting this together. A lot of time and effort went into putting this together, and she deserves all the credit for that. So thank you for doing that today. Today is a conversation that's bigger than one transaction, one market, or one organization. Today we are here to talk about water. But really, we're here to talk about the future of West Texas, because water is a housing issue, it's a land issue, it's a development issue, a business issue, an environment issue, a property rights issue, an economic growth issue, and for every one of you realtors in the room today, it is definitely a client issue. The families and individuals you serve, they want to know where they can build a life. The businesses you serve, they want to know where they can invest. The communities you serve, they want to know how they can grow responsibly, sustainably, and with confidence. None of that happens without water. As AE of the PBBOR, my role is to deliver you return on investment for your member dues. Not simply react to the market, but help you understand the forces shaping the market, to bring the right people into the room, to ask better questions, to connect the dots between public policy, infrastructure, housing, land, and the future of West Texas, and to earn the moniker, the voice for real estate in the Permian Basin, and that is why today matters. This summit is an example of that return on investment. Education that informs, advocacy that matters, relationships that strengthen our industry, and conversations that help you better serve your clients and your communities. We want to help you know what sold yesterday and why, but more importantly, to understand what's coming next. So today, I encourage you to listen closely, ask questions, meet someone new, and think about how this issue impacts your business, your clients, your community, and the future we are building together. Here's what I learned in my first year here in Midland, Texas. The Permian Basin has never been a place that waits for someone else to solve its challenges. You work, you lead, you create. Together, we will build a better West Texas. One last note, today's conversation does not end here. This is part of a larger board commitment to bring you the issues, the speakers, the education that help you better serve your clients and grow your business. Thank you again, Kelsey. Another round of applause, please, to Kelsey. Amazing, amazing project management skills we can all learn from. So today and tomorrow, we are one board, one future, fueled together. In a nutshell, like Kelsey said, I can go on and on and on and introduce this next speaker, but just know this next speaker is a strong voice for West Texas, and let's welcome him to our meeting here today, Texas State Senator Kevin Sparks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I would say for the Realtors, this is a pretty good group for 9:05. So thank you guys for being here. I could tell you, just looking at the panel of experts that are going to follow me, these people have vast more knowledge and experience than I do in water and water code. So I'm going to give you just a quick update. I've served basically in 2 legislative sessions. Both sessions had pretty good progress made for the state in water. This last session, probably the most significant legislation for long-term water for the state of Texas. And so let me start by just giving you a couple of bills that passed this in the 89th legislature. So Senate Bill 7, which was also House Joint Resolution 7, and passed the voters passed in the constitutional amendment in 2025, allocates $1 billion a year for water development reforms and resources for the next 20 years. Why is that significant? Because when you really understand where Texas is, there's hardly any place in Texas, maybe one small area of East Texas, that's not in some form or phase of being water short. You know, it was only, a year and a half ago that a report came out that Georgetown literally could be within a couple of years of completely running out of water. I don't know. You may have some remarks on that. Well, think about Georgetown. I don't know if you've been to Georgetown recently, but I mean, if Georgetown runs out of water, that's going to be significant, not just for that community, which is huge, but for everybody around it. Huge water battles happening across the state. And a lot of this comes from Texas's history of private property rights, right? Hey, I own this land, I own the water under this land, and therefore I can do whatever I want to do with it. We have, we've gotten away from this idea of my responsibility is not just to myself, but it's to my neighbors as well. It's, you know, Jesus said it as love your neighbor as yourself. And so while it's my property, right, I also have a responsibility to make sure that what I'm doing on my property is not disenfranchising or disabling my neighbors. And that's part of what we're seeing in Texas in this concept of being able to export whatever I believe is my private property. One of the other things that Senate Bill 7 did is it basically said that no less than 50% of the revenues to the Texas Water Fund must be channeled towards expanding the state's water supply portfolio. So it was very specific in that, hey, we don't want to just take $1 billion a year from the state coffers, that's y'all's tax dollars, ours as well, and allow that to be used for maintenance that should already be going on within our communities and across our state. At least 50% of that needs to go towards new sources of water. We've lived the last 30, 40 years, most of my lifetime in Texas, with this notion of, hey, we need to do a better job of conservation. And I believe we still have to have that mindset. But conservation alone is not going to get us to a point where we have water, where we have sufficient water resources for the whole state. So the bill legislates that 50% of that $1 billion each year has to go towards new sources. Well, what are new sources, right? A lot of what we're looking at, and we had an interim charge just a couple of weeks ago down in Austin, and that interim charge looked at two different things. It evaluated, it was having experts come in and talk about desalinization of water, and that's not just, cleaning up ocean water like they're trying to do down in Corpus, and I know the next speaker is going to speak to that probably extensively, but it's also the ability to desalinate brackish water. So we're fortunate in Texas that we have brackish water reservoirs all over the state that have tremendous amount of potential supply. It's going to cost some money, right? It's going to take energy. The good news is we have plenty of energy to do that. We just need to be smart about how we develop those resources. One of the things that we learned in that hearing we're struggling with this whole concept. One of the resources that we have out in West Texas, we produce over 1 million barrels of produced water each and every day. That's a tremendous amount of fluid. We have the technology to clean that water up, again, at a cost. But what's holding us back right now are permits from the TCEQ to allow us to use those fluids in a beneficial way. And so one of the challenges that we have right now is trying to make sure that the TCEQ government doesn't stand in the way of significant progress. And, we all want to make sure that we're good stewards of the environment, right? But I can tell you, having seen a lot of the results and a lot of the projects that have been, there've been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in the last 7 or 8 years in different desalinization pilot programs, looking at how that water is scrutinized on the back end. I can assure you it's much cleaner than the water that I drank out of the water hose growing up here in Midland, Texas in the 60s. And here I am. I've made it past 60, so far so good. So I have very high level of confidence that we have the technical ability to make sure that what we're using, whether we're using that commercially after it's been cleaned up, whether we're using it in agriculture, even if we're putting it into stream beds like the Pecos, that we have the ability to make sure that we do that responsibly. And we have a responsibility as legislators to make sure that our government agencies who are very risk averse aren't the holdup in making progress on these issues. So we also had House Bill 49, which kind of touches on that. And this was a bill that Representative Darby and Senator Perry out of Lubbock championed. And basically what this bill did, from a legal standpoint, it absolved a lot of the liability for entities to try to recycle water, right? No company wants to put their whole company at risk by using new technology, staying within the parameters that TCEQ or the Railroad Commission or whomever sets up, and then come back and find out 5-10 years from now that their whole company has been wiped out because because of liability issues. As long as they're following all the rules and regulations, right? This is liability that as citizens we all are at risk, right? We all share risk every time we get up in the morning, every time we get in our car, every time we fly on an airplane. As we develop new resources for the state of Texas, we're all going to share in that risk, and we should. Otherwise, we'll see no more improvement in solving this problem. Let's see, we've got another Water, Ag, and Rural hearing coming up in September, and it's basically going to be assessing the water demands of energy-intensive technologies, which, once again, I think you guys are going to hear some about. So this charge examines water consumption rates for data centers and other high-consumption cooling technologies. The committee will also look at kind of the larger aspects of data centers coming to Texas. We were having this discussion before we started today. There's certainly benefits of new technology coming to Texas. There are benefits of new industries coming to Texas. It's our job as legislators and really as the community as a whole to make sure that we're vetting all of those new neighbors well. They're going to be folks that come in and they'll be fly-by-night folks. You guys have been here in the oil and gas industry. We know what that looks like, right? And then there are going to be good actors that want to come in and be good neighbors. They want to contribute to our communities. They want to make sure that whatever they're doing is not a detriment to their neighbors. And I think that's where we've got to focus. And I would just end by saying this has been an interesting thing for me. For those of you guys who don't know me, I grew up here in Midland, went away to college, moved back immediately to begin what's now been a 40-year career in the oil and gas industry. And really had never envisioned running for office. But here I sit, and one of the things that I have learned is I've tried to figure out what happens to communities as they get larger and lose that sense of taking care of their neighbors. My district, for those of you who don't know, goes all the way to the top of the Panhandle. I represent 45 counties. And my rural counties out in West Texas still do a really good job of pulling together. I've been on Texas Department of Emergency Management sends me messages as we have emergencies in our district. So I've been getting texts from TDM since last Friday for the fires that are going on up in the Panhandle, and they've been rough. Fortunately, we passed some really good legislation last session that have better protected our firefighters and our state emergency management to be able to address that. But it's been super dry, winds blowing, the temperature's been in the upper 90s. But I'm telling you, those communities pull together to fight whatever calamity they're fighting. As our communities get larger, somehow we lose that. And in my lifetime, I have seen that play out in Midland and Odessa. It's not the same community that it was in the 50s and 60s. So we have to be, I think, very intentional on how we run our communities. And I jotted this down this morning. And I'll close with this. Limited government has a limited amount of resources. And we want that, right? Who in this room votes for higher taxes every chance they get? Right? Hardly any of us. So government has a limited amount of resources. And therefore, we've got to be very responsible that we focus those resources on critical infrastructure. Now, you guys may be big dog park folks. I don't know. But I don't see dog parks as critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is making sure we have enough water. You know, you can go without a lot of things, but you can't go without water for more than just a couple of days. And the reality is, things like water, sewer. How many times have you seen people put their names because they gave $1 million to reconstructing sewer lines? Who wants to have their name on that project, right? Hard to raise money for those things. electricity, roads, schools. Those are the critical issues that we have to make sure that our communities are taken care of if we're going to be viable communities into the future. We can do that. Midland is the Permian Basin, actually all of West Texas. I represent the best people in the state of Texas. I truly believe that. We have the ability and we have the resources to make sure that we have everything we need for my kids and grandkids. We were fortunate enough last night to keep 2 of our grandkids. And every time I spend time with them, it drives that message home in my heart that we can't just look at whatever the latest fad is. We've got to first focus on those critical infrastructure needs so that 30, 40, 50 years from now, my grandkids, your kids and grandkids, have the same opportunities that we've enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sparks. We're very thankful for your time today. It is now my honor and pleasure to bring up my new friend, Dr. Charles Porter. He is here with us. You may have heard him speak at different real estate conferences. He's a real estate broker, but can I call you a water expert? I feel like I can call you a water expert. You can go ahead. Do you want to pull this up?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Thank y'all. Thank you, Senator Sparks, for your service. We need more people like Senator Sparks to dedicate his life and his work to help us in the people of Texas. Today, I've got 2 opportunities to talk. This first hour and a few more minutes, I'll try to stay right at it, to talk about my general feeling about water in Texas. In the last couple of months, I've spoken in Granbury, I've spoken in Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin several times about my passion, and that is finding a way to make water something available fairly to everyone. So this afternoon, you'll see the other thing I've got up here. It took us 15 years to change the contracts, the promulgated contracts at the Real Estate Commission, to add some water notices, which we're going to spend the whole hour to talk about why that is, how you deal with it as a broker, how you make that fit into your fiduciary duties. I don't know what's coming, but it's coming. It's finally here. We've got the new worry, and that's data centers all over the state. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's good, bad, and ugly about them. When I went to Granbury, I walked right into the middle of the Glen Rose battle against some data centers, and I didn't take the side one way or the other. In fact, this person called me and said, "Look, we've been asked to sponsor your dinner, but we're not going to sponsor it unless you agree with me." I said, "I've never had that proposed to me in 500 speeches, but that's okay with me. I'll buy the dinner. I'm just here to talk. I'm not here to take a side. I want to share with you some things that are different." Now, my first book, Spanish Water, Anglo Water, which is about the history of water in San Antonio, where all water policy starts in Texas, all the way back into the 17th century, if you can believe it. Water renders the land its value. There's no doubt that land without water has little value. Land with water has more value. Nobody cares if Charles Porter makes any money if I lease my water at my farm in Wilson County, but we do care about this. If San Antonio, the 7th largest city in the country, goes out and takes the water from Castroville, what happens to the ad valorem tax base there? Our most cherished value in this state since 1840 has been public school education through the 12th grade. It's based on ad valorem taxes. But if you take away the water from a community, community will spiral down, okay? And they'll spiral down to where there's not enough money for good schools. And I can name cities around this state that this happened. So water renders the land its value. But water is not the new gold. We don't mine water. We've got to use water sustainably. We have to use water sustainably, not only environmentally sustainably, but financially sustainably. We tend to focus on environment, also financial sustainability. I'll talk about this more in a minute, but do you realize that a 60-inch pipeline right now, I have bids, is $10 million a mile? 100 miles is $1 billion. And if you try to raise somebody's water rate $5 a month, they come out of the woodwork. People you've never seen before will come out and scream about it. We paid too little for water for a long time. I teach at St. Edward's University, and I teach a lot of water law courses there, and I've taught my students it's not just the tap that you turn on. Water comes from someplace, so you've got to think about it. Now, again, it's a debate about water issues or population growth. I can make the argument that when they did it in Bastrop a few years ago, when that group stood in front of the national camera and said, "Don't come to Texas, ain't no water," that's not about water. It's about them not to wait to get their donuts. They're not to have new growth. My dear friend Doug Miller, who was a member of the legislature for years from Comal County, he fought for years to get a groundwater conservation district in northern Comal County. He said, "Charles, they fought me for years because they don't want growth in certain areas," and I think that's fine. Do I want to see Austin go back to 250,000 people like it was when I was a kid? That's where I grew up. Sure, it'd be nice. When Darrell Royal came on Sunday night, there was no traffic. He and Cactus Pryor with a black background, nothing else, and everybody watched it in the 60s. But growth's important to everybody. But if you don't have water, there's no growth. Now, we do have a new groundwater play, and that's produced water. There's a big case out here recently that was involved with produced water, who owns produced water. And I think that the Supreme Court got it right. However, you've got to think about it a little bit differently. Do I want to own that produced water out of an oil well? Probably not. But what I do want, if they, like my place on Cibolo Creek, I would like to have the royalties off some minerals that come out of that produced water, right? And I know right now there's a project over here. I think there's a little lake close to New Mexico where they're about to put so much produced water that's clean in there, they'll fill the lake up and overflow it. And I've met countless men and women who are in the process of knowing how to clean that water. So that's a great source, a very smart source. And I think that that's something that's another one. You know, when you're surrounded like we are in Texas, and I'm telling you, you look at Georgetown, Corpus, Mathis, Belleville, Beeville, Three Rivers, Marlin in East Texas, Blanco, and all through the Rio Grande Valley, we're in trouble water-wise. Mainly because the state democracy says we're going to have 3 million more people come to the I-35 corridor by 2030. I don't know what the corridor is, but I'm telling you, that's a lot of people. Even if we go back to a normal rainfall pattern, we've got more people pulling on that water, right? Now, brokers beware, be prepared. We have changes to the farm and ranch promulgated contracts. We'll talk about this afternoon. A group of us, after we changed the property code in 2015 to add one sentence to the disclosure notice, are you in a groundwater conservation district or a subsidence district? You know, it took 2 years to get that done. And I always thought, well, people are going to fight us, but frankly, no one said a word about that. Over 60 million people in transactions have seen that. It was the first time in 65 years we even disclosed what a groundwater conservation district was. I wrote an article for the Panhandle Plains Historical Journal about the history of that 1949 act, and one of my conclusions is, had we called it a groundwater regulatory district in 1949, it would have never passed. But we're here now, and I think it's important to consider. We'll talk about that. I think that groundwater transfer from East Texas to Central and West Texas basically is already gone. People don't care what the law is. The public will is, I don't want to move groundwater from my area to someplace else. Now, you can go back and look at Corwin Johnson, a great professor at UT Law School who died in the 80s. He talked about how we need to use our water resources for the public, but not deplete the water resources. I did a program at the Bullock Museum back a few years ago called Endearing Women. We picked 12 women who had saved their family ranches and farms after their husbands died. And I had a couple of them up in East Texas I picked that were struggling to hold on to ancient family lands. But, I mean, she would start a chainsaw on the phone because she's out there working. She said, I will fight like a Comanche, and I have one drop of my water go to Dallas. Well, that's okay. I respect her for that. But she's struggling. You could figure a way to lease some of your water to Dallas, right, to bring some income in. And I think that's a thought. Now, you look at is groundwater worth something to you in the ground? Sure it is. you keep the groundwater in the ground, you've got springs flowing through your land. In fact, the Post Oak Savannah Groundwater District will pay you now a fee to keep your groundwater in the ground. But that might not be the best policy. And I'll tell you, what happened this last summer in the 2 special sessions when Kyle Bass just asked for a exploration permit to explore groundwater on his own lands that he had purchased. Everybody thought, first of all, he's a Bass brother. He's not a Bass brother. He went to CCU on a diving scholarship. He bought 2 ranches in East Texas. He immediately knocked down every dam on all the creeks. He wanted the water to flow again. And I mean, he contacted me and I said, when you go to that hearing that's being held at the Capitol tomorrow, you're going to be a piñata. And no one understands the real purpose of this. And what happened was, it was an 11-hour hearing, and people vilified him. Yet, we own the groundwater beneath us, right? We never argued about that. We finally, Troy Frazier finally said, enough's enough. There's no question. In 2011, we own the groundwater in place beneath us, and it is a vested interest we'll talk about. So here's the question. I wrote in my 3rd water book, I talked about, college textbook about ownership. If I own something, but I don't have the benefits of the characteristics of the ownership, I don't want to own it, right? And I don't think that everything's a taking either. And I think that's something that I don't blame the people of Wimberley who were against Tim Throckmorton and Bart Fletcher from moving water from Wimberley area to Buda and Kyle. But I think we've got to understand the legislature says, I'll show you a slide in a minute, that you can't discriminate against someone wanting to move groundwater out of district. But there's a way to do it correctly. And Lord help the areas that don't have a groundwater conservation district, because they're in huge trouble. Now, I think that data centers, and by the way, have a lot of people talking about reserving their groundwater rights. But if you can't deliver the water to a customer, it's only worth what you can use it for the land. Groundwater is not the new gold. If I can't find a customer to buy my water, what can I use it for? I can use it for what I do on my place. I wrote an article for UT Law School with Ed McCarthy, Methods and Challenges in Water Valuation. It was presented in 2016. And I now analyze it. If you can't move it and don't have a buyer, then I can use it to grow corn. Here's what that value is if corn's at $7 a bushel. At $4 a bushel, it's a lot less. So all that is something to consider. I'm updating again at the State Bar Real Estate Seminar at their request this summer. I think data centers are misunderstood. I think water is a red herring. I think it's something that people deal with and scare everybody to death, but the data centers, most of them that are going to make it, are recycling their own water, and they're finding new ways every day. Now, I'm a little bit concerned. There were some bills that were proposed in one of the special sessions this summer that would basically make it impossible to move water from East Texas to West Texas, to limit the total amount of water you could move to 5% of model available groundwater. Well, there's no way that small amount, even in the most sufficient groundwater area, to move it across the state to make it make financial sense. In fact, I'll tell you now, every single water deal I've been involved in, everything I've analyzed and done financial analysis for groundwater conservation districts, I can prove that you can make a better return on $1 billion by investing in tax-free muni bonds for 12 years. And without a risk, without moving, because of the problem with permitting, the people's attitude, and transportation permits over those 10 or 11 years and legal fees, you've got very little hope. Now, for brokers, to try to determine a tract water rights, kind of like trying to determine executive rights in a mineral rights situation, right? So you got to get an attorney to help you with it, period, no matter what. Water rights are tremendously more complicated than anything you've ever seen, and the most complicated contract we have is the farm and ranch contract. So you need to have an attorney, but don't bring a downtown Houston attorney out here to Midland, okay? Sure, don't bring one out to Gillespie County. You've got to understand the local culture, and the beautiful thing about us in Texas, we like local control. Now, Ed McCarthy talks about some areas of Texas that you have local control, but that's the whole reason we have individual groundwater conservation districts that are controlled by local people, because we're not Rhode Island. The worst drought in Beaumont history is 15 inches of rain. That's more than El Paso gets in a good year. So we can't have a one-size-fits-all policy. But remember, for the brokers and agents like I am, we've got fiduciary duties to our clients, right? We've got to be scrupulous and meticulous. We've got a heavy duty to our clients. Now, I watched the U.S. Drought Monitor. This has actually been kind of an improvement. The Blanco area down in central Texas for almost 2 years had a dark brown hole. And one of my good friends, Candy Cargill's mayor. I've tried to help her find ways to deal with her issues with hydrologists. This came out last week. But you can see where the fires are up there in the Panhandle, that dark brown area. I live on off Toro Canyon in Austin. I love it. But I can tell you, the juniper trees, what everybody calls cedar, when they dry out, they're napalm. And I'm frightened about it, very much so. At St. Edwards, we own a couple of those canyon areas. And of all things, I convinced them to actually make about I guess it's about almost 1,000-yard buffer back there to cut out the juniper trees so that the hillside where their multi-million-dollar homes wouldn't get sucked into those homes. Everybody says, don't talk about that, because if we tell Chubb Insurance they won't insure these homes. Well, they shouldn't insure the homes, and you got, like on our canyon, I mean, it's dangerous and scary. But you can see, look at down here where Corpus is. I mean, you're watching the rains go by the last couple of weeks. Corpus didn't get much. And that's the city of all that might be the first major city in this country that will seriously run out of water, maybe as early as this summer. Now, you can look at this. I did this the other day, our reservoirs. Now, across the state, our reservoirs are 78% full. Well, that's a great statistic. But look at the ones in West Texas. Look at Falcon Reservoir, 21%. That's up from 8% down on the Rio Grande Valley. Amistad Reservoir, now 30%. It was about 10%. Choke Canyon, 7.1%. That's where Corpus gets some of its water. Lake Corpus Christi, 10%. It's been around 7%. I mean, if you just follow kind of I-35 and west, water's in huge shortage and demand. Elephant Butte, where we have had a big battle with New Mexico for a long time, 11.6% full. So you can see how tough things are. If you look up in the Panhandle, McKenzie Reservoir, 11%, Greenbelt Lake, 6.6%, Palo Duro Reservoir, 0.4%. It's a real headache. And Medina Lake around San Antonio's basically been dried up for the last 10 years. Now, we also have curtailments, okay? I gave a speech. I'm always involved in a seminar at the Post Oak Savannah Groundwater District every year, where Vista Ridge Pipeline runs water to San Antonio, 50,000 acre-feet a year. And I was there when the county judge got up before my speech a few months ago and said, we're going to curtail every bit of these leases. We're going to stop the leases. Well, I don't know how you do that legally. And he stirred everybody up in the audience. But here's a prime example, Blanco Perdonaz Groundwater District. They don't have any water, so they're curtailing everything. I know some friends that have a place in Bandera, and they're good people. They split part of the ranch into a subdivision. They paid fees to have water come from one of the water companies, and they get an email, not a phone call, back about 6 months ago saying, we're not going to provide you water. Don't even call us back till January 2027. Well, they've got the other part of the land sold. They've got the streets in, the lots are in. And now the project stopped, even after they paid $500,000 for the water tap. Now, they can break the CCN, the right of that group to sell water, if they go to Bernie to get the water. I'm sorry, I meant Bernie, not Bandera. But it's 15 miles away. Who's going to pay for that pipeline to run it down there to that subdivision? So that's stopped. Now, again, who cares about what happens to Bill and Mary? We should. The same token, what happens to the value of all those lots sitting there that can't sell because there's no water? All right. Time is of the essence in all water transactions because most water transactions that are moving groundwater around are taking years and years and years and years. I do not want to be involved in that. I've seen people, I watched the Wimberley folks electrical purification go to several big ranchers, and the people in Kyle and Buda and Goforth District needed it badly. And it went on for 10 years, and they finally got a permit after spending $8 million. Once that permit was there, they could make $140,000 a year in gross revenue. What'd they do? They pulled out, right? But what does Wimberley and what does Kyle and Buda do? Where do they go for their water? I think we've got a surface water crisis on the Rio Grande. I think we're working on it, but there's permanent change that's detrimental to all of Texas. Why is that? I gave a speech at if you're a farm and ranch broker, you ought to go to the big land conference A&M does in San Antonio every year. And I had just been down to the Presidio area at a friend's ranch, and I wanted to go see where the Concho River in Mexico met the Rio Grande. Before you get there, the Rio Grande's like my finger. Once it hits there at Presidio, it becomes like your arm all the way down. But 180,000 acres of new land in Mexico is being irrigated from that. So there's a trickle coming from the Concho. Now, we have a 1944 treaty that there's no penalty if you don't honor the treaty. And so what's happening in the valley? Well, when Amistad got down to 9% and Falcon got below that, I had a friend who had an orchard there, the family for 30 years. They plowed it under. And right now I'm working on some things for McAllen down there with irrigation districts. I mean, it's a critical problem in the valley. But how do we tell the people of Mexico, you can't irrigate those lands? Because they got to irrigate the land so they can't grow anything. So it's something that's a tough thing. Surface water owned by the state is not a solution. It's totally allocated. And I don't have time to talk about the way we did that, but the surface water is over-allocated, frankly. And to get a surface water permit from the TCEQ, you're looking at 1 to 3 years, and you probably won't get it. Okay, you really won't get it. Even if I wanted to take my water right and lease it to Senator Sparks for a year, I'm looking at a year and a half, because everybody up and down the river is going to get to say something about that. All right, I think that we've got some real. I think the legislature and all of us involved are trying our best to find a long-term solution. I think Prop 4 is great, and I voted for it. I was fortunate enough to be the MC of the $2 billion thing at the Capitol when we took it out of the rainy day fund the second time. The first time I was on the panel, I think it's fabulous. All that money, most of it went to big cities because we're so far behind in our infrastructure in sanitary sewage plants and storm drains. I lived in Houston 17 years. I developed property there. There was something called the Reeking Regatta, where you get in a canoe and go down Buffalo Bayou. The whole goal was not winning the race. It's not falling out of the canoe. Because the Southwest Treatment Plant dumped 17 million gallons of raw sewer a year into Buffalo Bayou. They couldn't shut it down because the 2 million people couldn't flush their toilets. Now, I think that if you think about $1 billion a year for 20 years, we've got about $170 to $200 billion of infrastructure headaches. Now, just think about that. If the cost of this repair goes up 5% a year, then we tend to be treading water, right? And why do we care about our sanitary sewer system? Because when that water goes through the sewage treatment plant and goes in the rivers, it's affluent. We've got to be careful about that. I did a study on Austin around St. Edwards. You cannot imagine the amount of raw sewage that's going into Town Lake every day. I think that the data centers shouldn't be considered the new Frankenstein's monster because we have rules and regulations that can involve them. Now, one quick thing, this is more of a legal business thing. A lot of people talk about leasing and buying water. There's a big difference between buying a groundwater right and buying a volume of groundwater. Corpus Christi is trying to buy the groundwater rights that Evangeline Laguna LP have gathered from the Welder family. Okay, I worked very hard for Corpus last summer. They didn't listen much to me because they were so desperate for what was going on. I think they overpaid by as much as 10 times what they're about to get. They were asked to take ownership of this groundwater right, fee simple, determinable. Now, as a real estate broker, Fee simple determinable ought to scare you. That means, well, I'm going to buy something, but I may not really own it once I buy it because they're reverter letters, okay? And I spit my tonsils out with them. I said if they do 19 different things, here's the most amount they can pay based on actual solid contracts of closed groundwater right deals. But I understand their worry. They are stuck in a nightmare down there, and so they paid $169,500,000 for this groundwater right. The contract's still pending. They're going to spend another $600 million to build the well field and move it to Corpus. Let's see, $600 million plus $169, that's a desal plant, folks. They tried to talked about doing a desal plant. I don't know what they're thinking. They're going to dump the brine back in the bay. That doesn't work. I'm all for desal. I'm hugely for desal. But you can't dump it back in our bays. If they can do a desal plant, the Carlsbad plant in San Diego, doggone it, we can do one here. I told Wierlebat and I told the San Antonio folks almost 15 years ago, it's time to do a desal plant. You're 145 miles away, okay? Get the right of way and make the corridor long enough to where as you come up the corridor to San Antonio, make room for other pipelines, and you can make money selling for the other pipelines. Exxon did that in the 60s with a big corridor going from Humboldt oil fields down into the ship channel. But if somebody's coming to you and talking about buying your groundwater or lease your groundwater, there's a difference between buying the right to search for groundwater, just like a mineral right, and a volume of groundwater. And there's a lot of things to think about that. Now, I don't need to go over this. I'll send these slides to you. We have a vested interest in our groundwater, right? But like Will Wilson and A.A. White wrote in a Southwest Journal article, SMU's journal in the 1950s, it's great that you own the water beneath you, but you can't brand it. You can't fence it, and it's always fugitive. It moves around all the time. So why do I want to own my groundwater at my ranch? I gave a talk to some guys in Leon County, a podcast. I do them. I don't know why I did it. But I said, you know, if the state owns my groundwater, who's going to get it? Nestle's. I mean, the social media frenzy that started after that scared everybody to death. But it's true. I don't have the money as a small farmer and rancher to go through the state process to get a permit for my water, right? Luckily, I'm in an evergreen groundwater conservation district, so I have some rules and regulations that protect me. Now, you're going to hear a lot of talk about the evil, terrible rule of capture. Nobody understands it, and you have to understand, if we do something about the rule of capture, it's not going to bring one more drop of water to the state of Texas, okay? I wrote an article in the East Texas Historical Journal about the history of the rule of capture. It's a 1904 case, a water case, a railroad case. It's a tort liability concept. The way you deal with the rule of capture is people can't waste it. You can't take the water maliciously. Of course, who would ever do that? That's subjective. But you can't cause subsidence. That's why we have subsidence districts in Fort Bend and Harris and Galveston County. Because Big Three, it's called Smith Southwest Industry. I knew the guys that owned it. When Friendswood came in and drilled some water wells down close to NASA, it dropped that land pretty quick. So you can't cause subsidence. But the best support you've got to deal with the rule of capture is a groundwater conservation district. And luckily, you are in a good one out here. Now, I won't go through all this as much. This is your groundwater conservation district. And I'll tell you, folks, brokers, agents, and citizens go to these meetings. Don't make them feel like the Maytag repairmen. Remember that old silly commercial? Because most people only come to those meetings when they've got anger about somebody trying to pull a permit. But we as real estate agents should be there every meeting. When we changed the property code in 2015, Dirk Aaron, who was head of the Clearwater District in Bell County, came to me and said, Charles, I'm scared to death about this change. These realtors are going to drive me crazy. I don't know what to do. A year later, he said, it's the best thing that ever happened. I have seminars with realtors. I don't have the money to go out and investigate what's going on. They told me what was going on. And it's been a very good thing. But please, follow my 3 ups. This is what I teach at St. Edward's to my class. Show up, keep up, and speak up. But don't write a letter to the Broker Lawyer Committee, like I was on at Trek, about, I don't like paragraph 3, it stinks, and that's the only letter. Write and say, here's paragraph 3 of this contract, here's the reasons it's not good, and footnote it. Now, when I wrote, I'm going to fuss a little bit at Trek. I was chairman of the Education Standards Advisory Committee. They elected me that. And then they asked me to write Legal 1, Legal 2 as co-author. And I wanted them footnoted. I fought for it because they're key documents, right? Especially broker responsibility manual. I want them footnoted, right? So you could see the sources. And I was told that if we don't write to an 8th grade level, the people gripe. What was my comment? Do we want 8th graders doing multi-million-dollar real estate deals? But it's just the way people misunderstand things. Now, here's the groundwater conservation. I don't know why it was blurry this time from the TCEQ, but here's another one. All those white areas have no groundwater district, okay? Now, out in some of that area, kind of in the central West Texas area, there's not a lot of groundwater. Abilene only has about 240 acre-feet of groundwater available. But look at Val Verde County, out where Del Rio is, 144 miles down Highway 90. Anybody can come in there and take what water they want, ship it back to San Antonio. Washington County, where I ran the Lone Star Water Forum for years. Washington County, where Brenham is, they don't have a groundwater conservation district. We had this big meeting every year for the city sponsored everybody, a lot of people did, and we had 300 or 400 people there, and I said one time, look, the topic I came up with, should Washington County have a groundwater conservation district? And I said, if I'm a developer, I'm going to come up through the Wortham Ranch, and I'm going to buy a little tract of land in Washington County and put my water well there, because I can take all the water I want there without regulation. And this older man in the back stood up. He said he'd been practicing law since 1953, which was interesting, and he just let me have it. And as God rewards you sometime for faith, the next day there's an article in the San Antonio paper that says they're trying to expand some subdivision, and what somebody did was buy a sliver of land in northern Comal County without a groundwater district. And if they'd been in Cow Creek District, they could do 68 homes. Since they bought that little tract of land, they could do 600 homes. It's a huge difference. All I can tell you is, y'all are in a groundwater conservation district, and I think every part of this state should have a groundwater conservation district, okay? But we don't like to fund them. The one out in Brewster County where Marfa is, their total budget this year, up from $13,000, is $20,000. You can't have an office. I mean, I can go on and on about that. Now, if you're a real estate agent, like us, you need to help your client figure out what groundwater conservation district they're in, right? Well, when Carlos Rubenstein was head of the TC Water Development Board, he and I came up with a way that you can go put an address in, and it'll tell you where it is. Now, the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts have the same thing, find your district. And we are not, as real estate brokers, allowed to interpret those rules, right, unless we're lawyers. But we need to tell our clients to take a look at it, right? All right. I'll just move through this pretty quick. I don't have time to go through all the process. I have a 4 and 8 hour water rights class that I wrote starting back in 2001. But we come up with a program that says we try to come up with a model available groundwater for each groundwater conservation district and area. But because of the costs involved, a lot of times it's more about politics than about true groundwater. Just a funny thing, right? And I'm not fussing at the Evangeline Laguna guys that tied it up. But San Patricio County, where those water wells are, all the years it had about 15,000 acre-feet of model available groundwater. The very year of all things they made that deal, it went up to 54,000 acre-feet of model available groundwater. Now, maybe it rained a lot that year, but one of the hearings we had, interim hearings we had this year, the members of the committee were really trying to pin John Dupnick down at the Water Development Board to try to come up with a better number of what groundwater we've got in the ground in certain areas, because we need to try to manage based on that. But that doesn't work either, because I did a study around Hays County, around San Marcos, where based on the last census, I knew how many homes used groundwater only. I figured 5,000 gallons a month on all those homes. then whatever capacity was already being used, I looked at what was there, compared to the model available groundwater, there should not have been another permit issued in Hays County, because it's gone. And it's even worse now. So these are the kind of things that Senator Sparks and others have got to deal with this next session of the legislature. Corpus got a little rain, I think, the other day. I hate to think that all of a sudden we'd have a hurricane and get a lot of rain, because I have watched before you were in the legislature, if it rains during the session, well, we don't pay much attention to it. But we can't be that way now, right? We do water planning every 5 years. We started that in 1957. Who's involved in that? Every realtor in this room ought to be involved in those water plans. All right. Move forward. Here's an article you can still pull that I wrote for the Water Journal about funding groundwater conservation districts. When I did that study of all the groundwater districts, only 5 had more than the corner McDonald's store makes in gross revenue, and only 6 or 7 had more than a tennis shoe store at Barton Creek Mall. We want some regulation of groundwater, but we can't give them a budget of $13,000 to $20,000 a year. If you're a fee-based budget and you're out here in some area where there's not a lot of activity, there are no fees. Even if you choose ad valorem taxes, the limitation on the ad valorem tax you could charge for a groundwater district would mean on a $2 million house you'd pay $50 a year in taxes. So we've got to figure out a better way to support our groundwater conservation districts, okay? And that's very important in our future. I'll go through data centers really quickly. I don't think that all data centers are the Frankenstein monster people think they are. That's from 1931, if you can believe it. There are a lot of data centers in Texas, but there are a lot of data centers that are proposed. But it's not Google or Grok or Claude that are doing these developments. They're old developers like me. I'm not involved in one. They'll come up and tie up a piece of property of 500, 600 acres or more, and then make a master plan, hoping that you can get a tenant or get a groundwater district, come buy it from you when you finish it. I mean, a data center. Now, we've got lots of that proposed, but like the one in Hood County around Glen Rose, Comanche, that scared everybody to death there. They hadn't closed on it yet. It's under contract pending the different approvals from the TCEQ for their stormwater drainage and for the sanitary sewage water. Now, if a data center comes next to you, to a residential subdivision, even if they recycle their water, which most do, right? They're still going to make noise. They're going to have blowdown in the backyard. So what does that mean to the value of those lots along the back of that, right? What do we have to do as real estate agents? We've got to disclose that. Is it a defect? Well, the law says that really I only deal with defects on the property itself. But if a prison goes in next to my person and I know that my client knows a prison's going in there, I think I've got a duty morally to tell them there's a prison plan there. So at night, you don't want your kids to be woken up by the lights and the sirens and everything, and look out their window at concertina wire. Same thing goes with data centers. Now, the good thing about data centers are, it's just like a friend of mine, Senator King, talked about one in Shackelford County. It could bring $10 billion alone to the ad valorem tax rolls. At 2.5%, kind of the average of ad valorem taxes, that's $250 million a year if they don't give away all the tax benefits. $250 million a year, and I can't quote the government code now for that county. They can't spend that much money by law. But what they can do is reduce things, and they will reduce property tax rates. And when I was in Granbury, at that audience out in front of me, they weren't hostile to me. I think they were. I had the groundwater district manager up next to me, and they weren't hostile. They listened to me. But when I really got their attention, I said, if the data centers that are planned for Hood County are done in a way in which it makes sense with all our permitting that already exists, they could lower your property taxes. And a lot of people started nodding their heads and thinking about it. So they're not all that bad. But there's so many planned now with so many developers. One of them that's planned up there is a developer out of Florida who's only been in business since 2023. And he's building a project that's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars that he's borrowing money for. Y'all remember what happened in the 80s with all the banks failing? What happens when that fails? They're going to build probably their own power plants. Well, that's good. It's better to use natural gas that's flared off that way maybe. But what happens when that data center fails? You might get a new power plant. Same token, why do you need a 1,600-acre data center? I've talked to all these people, I can't even understand their language, that are high-tech people. They said in 5 years, you may need a smaller center to process all this data. And it's not just AI. It's the two in Fort Worth process all of Wells Fargo's banking every day. You know, so it's a way that we can do it. And I'll flip, we can look through this later on. I did some analysis of different ones, and here, let's look at this. This was after I looked at the groundwater, model available groundwater in our districts around the state. And the most lucrative model available groundwater in the state is Brazos Valley, it's close to A&M. Now, under the new regulations that were proposed to be passed, they could never transfer out of that district more than 5%. And another one of the bills that didn't pass said that not only could they not transfer out 5%, if they decide to transfer out 5%, all the other districts in that groundwater management area would have to vote a 2/3 vote to allow that water to leave. Well, I can tell you right now, unless you're a nut or somebody who is a Don Quixote optimist, you're never going to make that deal work. You cannot make any of these groundwater deals work over a few miles unless you get at least 15,000 acre feet to run through that pipeline. So I don't have time to go through it all, but looking at all these districts, and there I have an analysis of all of them, if that bill would pass, there will not be groundwater transfer across the state. So what does Blanco do? What does Georgetown do? What does any city do? You don't have availability of groundwater from the east, okay? There's no desal plant that's going to be available for 10 years. So what do? I told them to go to DEFCON 1 and start going in all directions. Mathis went out in their backyard. You may have heard about that. They had an old tool yard. They went out there and saw a concreted area they couldn't figure out. They broke it out. There's no water well there. Well, there's water in it. So Mathis started pulling their old groundwater out. In Blanco, Candy's got 12 old groundwater wells they have plugged up. Well, I told her to open them up. Well, we don't have pipelines there. I said, look, you're desperate for water. You need to run these oil. I don't know enough about oil and gas, but apparently there's some flexible pipelines you can lay on the ground and put a lot of water through. I told her to get into that, especially the well that's 100 yards from you. Pull that water on the ground and get it done and put in the treatment plant so you can find some other sources. So there are people thinking about it. Now, the big one in Abilene, Stargate, of course, it's going to be one of the largest. It's going to be, they're going to closed loop system for their water. I'm hearing now that there's a possibility, there's a new fluid that will go into these server banks. They can actually put them under this fluid and it'll cool them down. But there are things and consequences to that. I think that we need to think back and figure for us and support our TCEQ and other agencies, and especially our groundwater districts, where a data center plans to come, okay? One of the bad side is, for a while, there's going to be a lot of people working on them, building them. In fact, I know of a 1,400 slip subdivision for mobile homes around Abilene for the construction guys to come in and build that data center. When it's finished in a year and a half, there'll be 50 employees. It's going to be something different. But let's just think about this. I looked at Gillespie County. I don't know if y'all been to Fredericksburg lately. It's unimaginable. During the pandemic, I taught a 8-hour class in the pavilion right next to the airport. I had to stop every 15 minutes because a private jet landed at the airport. I mean, I had to stop. I couldn't hear it. So, but when you let's look at the reality of that, okay? You look at all the model available groundwater in Gillespie County, 13,000 acre feet. And you figure the growth of Pulaski County, you think there's a lot of growth, but it's really not that much. So I did this analysis. I figured the number of housing units, the people, the growth, et cetera. And I came down to a bottom number, and I said, look, if you've got model available groundwater of 13,000 acre feet, and that's what the state's projected all through 2060, Well, 60% goes to irrigation use. That's pretty much standard around the United States. They've got 5,210 for domestic livestock. Just in a few years, that water's going to be gone. Okay? So those are the things to think about. Now, these guys are from Florida. You know, I won't go through all those things, but there's a lot of things there that will make it interesting as we go. You flip through this. Let's talk about brackish desal. That's short-term relief. Brackish water is between 1,000 and 3,000 total dissolved solids. It's not just salt water, it's mineral salts and everything else, right? And you can tell seawater is 335,000 total dissolved solids, right? Do y'all know the largest inland desal plant in the world is sitting in El Paso right now? The K. Bailey Hutchinson plant. They process 28 million gallons a day, and they get about 12 million gallons out of it. And they got it built in 2 years, and everybody says, wait, Porter, you talk a lot about right-of-way problems. Well, we're not even focused on right-of-way to move pipelines. That's the initial step. But all the brine goes and is re-injected underground 4,000 feet through Fort Bliss, so they got it done in 2 years. I've been to that plant. It's kind of an amazing thing. They mix good groundwater with brackish groundwater, and the reason it happened in El Paso that had a problem is that as water has grew so much, they share the Waco-Boston aquifer underneath the two cities. By the way, we don't even have a treaty about groundwater share between Mexico and America. That's another thing we've not done. But El Paso partly solved that. Now, if that sounds like a lot of water, that's about 4% of El Paso's water use. And there are a lot of brackish wells and brackish aquifers in Texas. Y'all have got a lot out here. So this is 1.3 billion acre feet. But that's not all available. I've had studies done. In fact, I'm writing an article now with an attorney that will go into one of these journals. Yes, we have a lot of brackish groundwater, but you can't pull all of it that may look like on these maps, because some of the studies have shown that when you pull the brackish groundwater out below a freshwater aquifer, it changes the pressures and they may infiltrate each other. Now, there is a possibility, though. San Antonio just spent $468 million on a brackish desal plant in southern Bexar County. Go back to what I said. 15 years ago, we talked about a desal plant in San Antonio, maybe getting it. That would have been about $800 million if they spent $500 million on a brackish desal plant. Is desal our solution in the long run? I don't know. Maybe. But if we keep having people move to our wonderful state because of a lot of reasons, it's a great place to live, no state sales tax. Where do you think these data centers are going first? They're looking at the areas where there's no groundwater conservation district, right? There are no rules. Okay? I had several of my students from St. Edwards who have become lawyers who called me, please talk to the people in Young County. A data center developer just bought 3,400 acres, and they want a groundwater district right now, conservation district. They called me up, and I said, guys, you're going to have to talk to Greg Ellis, and you're going to go through the process for 2 years. You're probably too late. Well, they didn't want a groundwater conservation district because they didn't want the state in their business until they need the state in their business. And same thing happened in Nueces County, right next to Corpus. There's no groundwater district. They're trying now to get one. Groundwater conservation districts are formed to help protect and conserve water and protect the people. I think we've got a solution that we could do brackish groundwater in different places. We got 53 brackish groundwater plants in Texas now. They're usually smaller plants in and around small communities, so they have a distribution center, right? So they can move the water. Again, because they know the transportation's so expensive. An old friend of mine, James Lee Murphy, was the in-house attorney for the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, and 10 years ago, he found 4 spots on the Gulf for a desal plant. That you could take the brine and ship it so far out in the Gulf that it would dilute. But you can't put it in the bays. You can't put it in the Intercoastal Canal. And I got to tell you something. I'm a little worried about 125,000, what I've been told, 125,000 injection wells. We're injecting stuff back into the ground from all kinds of operations. We had a case. You may have heard about it. Somebody bought a piece of land next door to a saltwater injection well. They were sure that saltwater injection fluid was infiltrating into their groundwater. And I was excited. Hot dog, we're going to have a trespass case that'll come through the Texas Supreme Court. I thought it was great. Goodness, we can figure this out. Hard to figure out whether it's really damaging or not. Well, the judges are geniuses. You can't have trespass if you allow someone to be there. And this guy that bought this farming property from the person he bought it from, the predecessor in title, had taken $180,000 settlement to allow the re-injection well. So there's no trespass. Someday down the road, in 100-something thousand re-injection wells, there might be a leak somewhere in ancient desal, and these re-injection wells. It might leak into somebody's groundwater. It'll be an interesting argument. Hard to prove, but an interesting argument. So I do think brackish desal is a solution. So again, conservation helps. Brackish desal helps. I think we should find a way, and some people in East Texas will be very mad at me, a couple of members of the House. We got to find a way to allow water from East Texas to come to the west. First, we got to have right-of-ways. Governor Perry tried his best to do a trans-Texas corridor, but he made it too wide, right? But we've got to have some kind of right-of-way access to run water across the stadium if we have a chance. And the way I tell people to do it, don't go to a landowner and say, I'm going to take this land from you and run it right through the middle of your property. Do it like they did with the Vista Ridge Pipeline from Burleson Lee County to San Antonio. They followed the highway. The next step is to go to people and say, I want to do a 60-year ground lease on that pipeline corridor, that at the end of 60 years, you'll get the land back. You'll get paid annually a fee for that pipeline coming through. And again, it's a water pipeline. If it leaks, it's not going to melt people. I've testified in a bunch of different hearings where oil and gas were running high-pressure lines through neighborhoods and things. That's a little scary, even though they get to do it. But a water pipeline's not a threat. All right, here's another big hope. I've been privileged enough at my church to usher with Ken Eichmann, who is a 3-star Lieutenant General, Air Force General. When I meet Air Force generals or Army generals, I'm scared immediately because I'm not the man they are, or the women either. But I know he can get it done. Ken's the man that had to clean up Oklahoma City after the bombings. In fact, McVeigh stayed in his first night, at Tinker Air Force Base's jail. Ken had to go in there and do that. I was chairman of the Briscoe Center for American History's Advisory Council at UT at that time, and we have all the McVeigh files, his lawyer, the judges, everybody. All those files are there. Then I had Ken's files come in as an archive. Not that you want, but at the University of Texas, you can go and find the whole story. We have the FBI reports that didn't. But I know about this. The reason I'm telling you that, this new plan, AXE-H2O, is out of Houston. There are 2 Air Force generals pushing it for a desal plan. Now, the main thing is they're talking about making it available up to 150 million gallons a day at $6.50 a thousand gallons. I mean, that's affordable. I'm doing a study right now for one of the water service corporations in Central Texas. I looked at every single rate sheet of all water service corporations, WCIDs, and other water utilities within the 100-mile radius of Gerald, Texas. And $6.50 a thousand is a real fair number. Now, the only reason it works is that they say they can process up to 100 to 150 million gallons a day. I'm going to go meet these fellas. I have a feeling they might know what they're doing. And Houston, Texas is our New York, right? It's where the wildcatter money comes from, right? It's where the people that have the money will invest. So this is a real hope for me. Now, you can have problems with seawater desal, right? There's leaks and all kinds of other headaches. But you think about it. If San Antonio had done that desal plan, I don't know why people find me. I don't promote, but I got a call out of the blue from somebody who says, we got some folks that want you to come to Argyle Club in San Antonio and talk to us about water and desal. And I thought I was going into a big group. Well, there were 15 people there. 4 four-star Army generals retired. And I sat down, my first slide was 5 miles away, there's the Gulf of Mexico that you could desal San Antonio, and you could have done that. Exxon in the 1960s got tired of fighting a battle running pipelines to the ship channel from the Humboldt area oil fields. So one young man had the guts, because Dale Woody was a friend of mine, president of Exxon Pipeline at that time, came in and talked the people into having not just a corridor, not just one pipeline easement, to have a corridor of pipelines, large enough to put a lot of pipelines in. And we thought he was crazy. Everybody at Exxon says, why are we spending all that money? Well, after they got that in, there are 20 other pipelines from other companies in there. It's become a big source of money for Exxon. We should do the same thing. We should have pipeline corridors from the Gulf back up to Austin, to Dallas maybe, and a grid. We got an electricity grid, right? We ought to have a water grid. I don't know if I'll ever win that battle. It took me 15 years to win the change in the promulgated contracts. But it makes sense, right? It makes a lot of sense to me. And we've got I-35 wet to the east, dry to the west, right? We've got to figure out a way to make that reasonable for people to use. Okay. In my last couple of minutes, I'll get finished before 10:30. This is a great site, TexasGroundwater.org, Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts. I've been an associate member since 2007. Go there, you can find out all kind of information about groundwater districts. I think that, I'm sorry I didn't take the time to look up, I don't know the general manager of your groundwater district here, but if my suggestion to the local board, have him come speak at a lunch and learn. Have him come be involved, because he's very, very important to this group. And the groundwater district managers that I know, and I know most of them, are very dedicated to what they're doing and how they handle it. It's the boards that get a little funky sometimes, especially ones that are appointed by the county commissioners. And that's will make some people mad when I say that. So, in the last couple of minutes, let's keep in mind a couple of things. Number one, surface water is owned by the state of Texas, held in trust for the people, just like when Spanish Texas was here. Okay? Groundwater is owned by the surface owner. We own the water beneath us. But it's fugitive. It moves around. It's awful hard to know where it is. There's another water geological container called diffuse surface water, right? That's water that rains, snows, ice melts, comes out of the atmosphere and runs across your land. It's yours if you can catch it before it goes into a river, right? Or a creek or a stream. We in Texas still allow people to catch all the water off their roofs. Other states don't allow that because of the conjunctive relationship between all these geological containers. What do I mean by that? When you walk through a creek bed in the summer, barefoot, you'll feel cold water on your toes sometimes. That's where an aquifer is feeding the stream. You go down the stream, especially in Central Texas, you'll see a little whirlpool. That's where the stream's feeding the aquifer, right? And so all these things relate conjunctively in the one water cycle. I think that if I've done an analysis, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house, about 2,400 square feet with a 2-car garage, if Austin, Texas gets 30 inches in a year, you could catch 60,000 gallons of water a year. Now, sadly, it doesn't come 5,000 gallons a month. But I can point you to subdivisions around Central Texas where nobody has a water system. They just purely pull water off the roofs and save it. My mother grew up in Taylor, Texas in the Depression. My grandpa, they were farmers, raised 8 kids. They had an above-ground cistern, below-ground cistern. They purified the water with charcoal in hardware cloth. Grandpa got out in the morning when it started raining. He'd pull some lever to let the water come off to the ground to wash the dust off. And there was a lot of dust in Taylor, Texas. Then he shut that off, and he raised all those kids with those 2 cisterns. So it can be done. And I think we ought to do that. Now, awful hard to store 5 or 10 or 20 or 30,000 gallons of water. I think we ought to do that to encourage people. And just like we have, I think we have a sales tax free day for school supplies, we ought to have that for anything to do with water conservation every year. I think that the last thing I'll say is we can buy little tinsel meters If you're thinking 60% of all the water is used in irrigation, these little tensiometers you stick in the ground, even the cheap ones, $50 each, they can tell you when it's time to irrigate, right? I drove through Pleasanton the other day. It was about 95 degrees, and some guy was out there with the center pivot at noon, and the water was just floating up in the air. I'm not knocking what he's doing, but you go up into this part of the country or far west Texas, they've got those center pivot faucets are almost on the ground. They're diking their rows so the water stays in the row and soaks into the ground. There's ways to do it now. All right, last 10 minutes. Anybody want to, I've just poured a lot of stuff down your throat. Anybody want to ask some questions? I'm sorry I wore you out. Why don't we, I'm not sure what the plan is, but I'm finished now. I'll come back this afternoon and we're going to focus purely on the contract changes, okay? Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Porter. You know those people who talk and it just makes you realize how much you don't know? That's what that experience was like for me. It is my pleasure to bring up Norman Ashton. He is the general manager of MCUD. I know he's kind of the highlight of today. Everybody's excited to hear from him.
Don't know about that.
Oh, yeah. Is that going to work, or do you need an adapter?
I think it will.
Good. Thank you, Kelsey. You can leave it right there, or you can put it here. Either way.
Okay.
I have your water, too.
Oh, that'd be great. Good morning. Thank y'all for having me. This is it's exciting to get to spread the word about MCUD, who we are, and get a little education out there because I think it's been a little too long. You'll hear today, I'm going to do things a little differently. Mine's going to be more about local, what's going on locally just with MCUD. Not going to get into any state regulations or things of that nature, just basically letting you know who we are and that we're here. It's been a long time coming. They've been working on this for 20 plus years, and the good news is that this last week we had the groundbreaking ceremony. If you've not seen any of the news media or social media, but we did have the groundbreaking of our Dr. Shelton Viney water treatment plant, which is fully operational now. So that's a very big milestone for MCUD and for the citizens that we serve in our district. So let's talk a minute just to again, my goal is to try to educate today. I'm going to try to have a few minutes at the end so that you can ask questions if you do have questions. But who is MCUD? We are not part of the county. Even though we are Midland County Utility District, county's in our name, but we are not. We are a state agency. We were created by the Texas legislature in 2011 and approved by the voters in 2013. We were given by the legislature 85 square miles of Midland County to cover, and none of that part of the district that we are associated with has any kind of infrastructure when it comes to water. As you all know, pretty much everybody out there is relying on wells or hauled water to get their water brought into them. So our goal is to change that. We have to look into the future. We can't look at the here and now. We've heard that this morning. We have to plan for 50, 75 years minimum into the future. That's my goal over the next 10 years for MCUD. Again, why were we created? So we were created because there was a need. So there was some forethought. Dr. Shelton Viney, he has like pushed our organization from the very beginning. He put, I'll just throw a number, he put $300,000 of his own personal money in to get MCUD up and running and started. He is very dedicated to this, continues to be dedicated to it, continues to be the chairman of our board. But we understand the reliance out here on well water. We've got to start looking at the future because those wells are not long-term solution. We have people in our county whose wells have gone dry. We have people in our county that their wells are producing 1 or 2 gallons a minute. Then we have people in our county that their wells are producing just fine for now. But infrastructure on a scale of 85 square miles does not happen overnight. It's going to take years to get that kind of infrastructure. If we were given all the money we needed to do it, it would take years to get that infrastructure in the ground, to get all the water contracts that need to be put together in order for us to be successful. Those things are going to take time. And right now, we have a little bit of time. We don't have a lot. The Okalala, where we are, is estimated at a 20 to 40-year life. So we are desperately looking and looking very hard. I don't know if desperately is the right word to use, but we're looking really hard at where can we secure other water sources for the region that we cover. Again, we talk years of planning, and a lot of people you're gonna hear as well. We in 2013, when the voters approved MCUD, they approved a small ad valorem tax of 3 cents per $100 value of home or property value. That brings in under $2 million a year into MCUD. That $2 million can only be used for operations and maintenance, cannot be used for construction by law. So, and as you heard a little bit earlier, water lines are expensive. We just installed 3 miles of a 12-inch main at $1 million a mile. So it's just really kind of crazy, the prices of things today, but that's just what we're seeing. And that's going to continue to increase most likely, right? But we have some of the best people in the world out here in West Texas that know how to lay pipelines and get things in the ground. So we're in a good place for that. We just have to work together to get that done. Construction. So again, MCUD was created and then it was approved in 2013. You just don't flip a switch and say, oh, all of a sudden we're providing water. It takes years of planning. And MCUD's pretty much right on track with where they should be, in my opinion, maybe a few years behind, 3 or 4 years behind. But it took years to get the engineering design for 85 square miles put together. And that engineering design has to come up with some numbers in order for us to be able to go out and ask the voters to float a bond in order to actually construct this infrastructure. So that is, it's taken a while to get us here. We're here. That engineering report is critical for us to go out for a bond. We can't do it without that report. And now we're looking at, last time when we went for a bond, most of you probably in here know, it did not pass, of course, but it was for $645 million. This time it's going to be significantly less. But I will explain that in just a little bit as well as to why it's going to be less. Some of this I've already talked about, the ad valorem tax that I just told you a little bit about, but just from the other sources, we are looking at grants. Texas Water Development Board, you're hearing this morning about the $1 billion a year and other funding opportunities that are available. Part of our problem, and I'm going to call it a problem, is out in West Texas that the area that we cover is pretty poor. In retrospect of what actually is happening out here. But due to some of the individuals that do have good income, shall we say, it skews the numbers and puts us in a different bracket when Texas Water Development Board looks at us. Puts us in a little bit of a different bracket, and they say, oh, well, you don't qualify because you have the economic ability to do it differently. So we're working with Texas Water Development Board, and we're going to be working with Senator Sparks to see what kind of laws and things we can change that actually are going to benefit us for the future. But grants, we're looking at federal grants. We're looking at other grants that are associated with hazardous material sites, such as a plume area that we have. So we do have an area that has about 45 residents in it that has chromium in the water, and we're working with the EPA to actually deal with that as well. So this morning's realtors. So water does equal economic development, right? And I just pulled this slide off the internet this morning when I was doing a little bit of research. But I believe it's probably pretty accurate that every $1 million in infrastructure is probably could account for up to $2.5 million in economic growth. That's what we want to see. I mean, the county wants to see growth. But we want to see it in the right way. We don't want to see it just expand and not have some sort of something in place to keep things nice and clean and developments to actually develop the way that it should in subdivision developments, or whether it even be residential homes and parcels of property that people are looking to do different things with. So we want to make sure that we do it right, because there is the opportunity that if we're not very careful, that just because we start providing water, anybody and everybody can move into the area and start doing whatever it is they want. And that's what we have to try to control a little bit, so that we maintain those values, those property values. This map, this is our service area. So you can see in the red outline, that's the city of Midland, and the three colored shaded areas are all MCUD area. The reason they're shaded is that we have it segregated into 3 different regions due to hydraulics that are needed in order for us to build out a distribution system. But as you can see, we cover a large part of the county, and a part of that problem again is being so rural and being long distance between residents and things of that nature. So it takes a lot of infrastructure, it takes a lot of money to build out something on this scale that's been asked of us, but we're going to get there. And we're going to get there in partnerships with the state and partnerships with the federal government and as many other private partnerships as we possibly can. So who can vote in the MCUD district? Only those that live in our district can vote for anything MCUD. We are looking at going for a bond in November. The exact dollar amount of that bond is still being considered. The board has final approval on that. I will say that it will be significantly less than that $6.45 million that we asked for, $645 million that we asked for last May. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million is what I'm suspecting that we'll be going for. The one thing that the board, they're a new board when it comes to their knowledge about how things are done. I have almost 40 years of experience in the water industry. I worked my entire career in Fort Worth for Tarrant Regional Water District is where I came from. And money was a little different there than it is out here, shall we say. But we are, we can take that $300 million, we can start building out our distribution system based off of our current plant that we have right now and start issuing revenue bonds in the near future and looking at grants. And one of the big grants that we are looking at is WIFIA. And WIFIA is a federal grant program that could fund up to 49% of our entire project cost. Working with the county on that, working with the county's legislative folks in Washington, D.C., to actually help us push that through to see if we can get that funding. Because now, I truly believe the new engineering report's going to come out and show that this 85 square miles is going to be probably closer to the $2 billion mark as far as build-out goes. So understanding CCNs. So Midland County Utility District, created by the legislature and our boundaries defined, we do not have to have a CCN because the legislature has defined our boundaries. But we do have a couple of CCNs in our district, and I want you to understand what those are and how they work and how they relate to MCUD. So I'm just going to give a little history, and I'm going to point him out. Jason's here with Park Water. But Park Water came to our board in 2019, and they asked for some agreements to be put in place that allowed them to get a CCN for Vander Ranch. And basically, MCUD did not have any facilities, did not have the infrastructure to be able to provide any kind of water at the time. And so that was supported for them to get the CCN for Vander Ranch. What that means for MCUD is that we cannot service that area. That is, the PUC is the final rule on that, and the PUC has ruled that that area now is under Park Water. Park Water also purchased the Greenwood Water Development Corporation, which was right there by the existing schools, and you see that in yellow as well. So that is their CCN that they purchased when they purchased Greenwood Water Development, and then they expanded into these areas. But those areas are areas that we cannot go into. We can't provide water into those areas. That's just the law. So we have to work around those. This is a picture of the water treatment plant that we have built, that's up and operational. You look down and you're like, well, where's the treatment plant? And if you look right to the left of those two tanks, there's a pad there, and that crane is lifting around a 53-foot container that has a RO treatment plant inside of it. That one plant can produce 500,000 gallons a day of water. And I guess I'm getting too close, sorry. Anyway, about 500,000 gallons of fresh water a day. We're at 20% waste, which is better than what we were expecting off of it. The facility is designed to eventually be a 3 million gallon a day facility. And what you see there is you see two ground tanks. One's for our well field coming in, which is right across the street, and that holds 2 million gallons. The one right behind it is our freshwater tank. It's partially underground for hydraulics purposes, and that's another 2 million gallons. And then we have a 100,000 gallon elevated tank to help pressurize the system. That facility, like I say, it's as of last Thursday, is truly up and running. We're providing water currently to two locations, the Midland County Detention Center that was built right next door to us, and Greenwood Independent School District's new facility off of 1110. So I pretty much have mentioned it already, and it just, I don't think that we can probably mention it enough, though, that groundwater has its limitations here in West Texas. We have got to be looking at other ways of doing business when it comes to water. We have had, I think maybe the city's been contacted, but I know we've been contacted by one of the large oil and gas companies out here that wants to do some studies with us, and about how do we take their water, their reuse, and reuse it. And I think that's very promising, because we have to be looking at them, we have to be looking at new technologies, and they have the deep pockets. They have the deep pockets that can help us to solve the problems that we have out here. We just have to do it right, and we have to do it as a group. You're going to hear here in just a second, maybe the next slide, but water is the future of West Texas. It's the future of anywhere in Texas, and we have to work together. So it's got to be MCUD working with the city of Midland, MCUD working with the county, MCUD working with Colorado Municipal Utility District, working with Odessa, Ector County. All of us in this area, we need to be working together for the same common goal, and that is providing safe, clean, reliable water. And I'm not going to rest until that's accomplished. We're getting there. We're talking. You'll hear Craig this afternoon. We're talking. And it's been an incredible journey coming out here. I've been, I spent my entire career in Fort Worth, and was asked to come out here after I took early retirement, and thought, why not? Maybe I can make a difference. And that's my goal. I want to make a difference. And I was told people don't come to West Texas for the scenery. People come to West Texas and stay because of the people. And I believe that as well. Everybody that I've met, we all have the same goal. We all want the same thing. But we also have to be cognizant of the dollars and asking the public for more taxes and more taxes. And we have to be able to somehow or another keep that as low as possible. Work with everybody. Make sure that we truly are doing our due diligence, we're transparent, and that we are not wasting. That is not anything any of us want to do out here, is either waste dollars or waste water. So that's about it for my presentation. I wanted to just open it up for questions, but I hope that gave you a little bit of more insight into MCUD and who we are. Again, we are not county, even though we say Midland County. We are not the county. We're a political subdivision of the state of Texas, governed by the Texas Water Code. So, any questions? Yes, sir. So one of the things that we're not very good at, and no excuses whatsoever, but we were not good at educating last time. You're going to see over the next 6 months, you're going to see a lot of educational material come out about what that money's going to do, what we can do with it. And the engineering report, it details out every dollar that has to be spent. And that's always going to be public record. It's going to be on our website. It's on our last one's on our website right now. And that shows you what that $645 million was for. That engineering report, in my opinion, was missing a few things. I inherited that engineering report. I'm currently having it totally redone, and it's costing almost $500,000 just to have it redone. But they said $645 million would build out our 85 square miles. Again, I think you could look at 85 square miles real quick and say even just for a 12-inch main at $1 million a mile. And you know, I left from Tarrant Regional where we were building 150 miles of 108-inch diameter pipe, and that was $2.5 billion for 150 miles of that. So you can start looking at the cost and saying $645 million probably wouldn't even build out our mains. So we are reevaluating what that is, what that dollar looks like. And we're looking at how do we take $300 million and this is going to be real layman terms, okay? How do we take $300 million and turn it into $2 billion, right? But that's how we're going to have to look at this. And that's the way I want to look at this. Because if I can do this way, then it's going to be a very small impact on the taxpayers. Because we're not going to issue even $300 million worth of debt all at one time. We're going to issue that over phases. MCUD being small, I have one other employee, that's it. And us being small, us growing, us being at the point now where we are operational, we are exceeding what our income is from the ad valorem tax by about $300,000 or $400,000 a year. And thank goodness for participation from Midland County, because, and I did have one more slide I should have went through. We wouldn't be where we're at if the county had not granted us almost $30 million to build the facility setting out there. Yes, they asked us to build it because of the detention center, but they asked us to build it such that we could provide water to the residents as well. So that's the reason it's built so large. They're looking at using 100,000 gallons a day for that detention center. One of the numbers I may have even went past in here is that a 500,000 gallon per day facility, it can manage anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 residents. So hopefully I went probably a little further in depth for what you were asking, but hopefully that answered your question. Yes, ma'am. So they have a fire department a volunteer fire department out there, right? You need to ask the county, and it's my understanding that the county is considering a couple of fire stations and are possibly thinking about that. I have talked to them about it, but I don't know where they are, if that's going to be a budget item this next year or what. But I do know that the county is talking about that. Yes. Yep. And you know, the other thing is fire hydrants. We want to make sure we're putting fire hydrants. All of our mains are going to have fire hydrants every 1,000 feet. So we want to provide that fire protection services as well. Any other questions? Okay. We will continue looking at grants and federal funding and other avenues to actually fund this. There are other ways, but they're very complicated and much more expensive for us to be able to do this. And so the people can probably pretty much think of it this way. We can do it easily in bond money, and this comes the educational part of it. Otherwise, when we do other funding sources, let's say we get that grant from the federal government for 49% of it, we still have to pay it back, right? So people are going to have to pay it in their water rates. They're going to pay it in that base bill. They're going to pay it however that it has to be paid back. So one way or another, that the the people have to pay for it if they want it, right? And if we wait much longer, and this is not a scare tactic, this is a fact, but if we wait much longer, then you're going to see more and more people totally running out of water. It's already out there. People are having it hauled in. It's expensive. I've heard in the upwards of $900 a truckload for 2 to 3 weeks of water. And so we want to, they talked a little bit earlier about, your neighbor. Senator Sparks did. And it's exactly right. We've got people who are like, we're against it because we have perfectly good wells, and you're going to take our water and you're going to sell it back to us. But their neighbor doesn't have water. What about their neighbor? So isn't their neighbor just as critical or not to get water to them? So that's our goal, is to make sure that we provide it to everybody, that's available to everybody. And it has to be done because when these wells do totally go dry, when the Ocala stops, if it is truly 20 to 40 years, I hope it's longer, but if it does stop, we've got to be prepared. And that's going to take years to do. So I think there was another question in the back. Yes, ma'am? Right. Yeah, that's it's an interesting, yeah, it's an interesting thought or in comment. But like I said, the PUC allowed the CCN, Certificate of Convenience and Needs. I get it mixed up every time. Anyway, they allowed the CCN to occur. And we didn't fight it because we didn't have any means to do that back in 2019, 2020. Park Water was started as a result of all of that. This is my understanding of history. I may be off of it just a little bit. And Park Water is the sole provider of water for Vander Ranch. The only way that MCUD could ever go into Vander Ranch would be through PUC approval for us to do that. That is not something that MCUD is currently going after. We have some bigger fish to fry as well, and we've got to. We also have some lawsuits. I will say that. I will not go into detail about those, but there are some lawsuits between us and Park Water that we have to resolve, and that's where it makes it difficult for me to give you much more of an answer. So, yes. So we are doing wells. We have 4 wells right directly across from our site. We're at Highway 307 and 1140, and it's the Spinks family. They were, and I'm glad you brought it up because people are like, well, you're doing more wells, and we're like, we get it, but we also understand those aren't long-term solutions, but it is the short-term solution for those that don't have water. And when we did the lease from the Spinks family, they were selling it for fracking, and they were selling on average of 2 million gallons a day of water coming out of that well field. We are now taking water out of that well field, and they no longer can use it for fracking, and we're taking 500,000 gallons. So we are taking less of a strain off that well field than was being taken off of that well field, and we're looking at alternative sources to supplement that, to bring it in, and how can we work with the city to do that as well. So we're working together with everybody we can to eventually get us off those wells because, again, we know they're not long-term solution, but they are short-term for the people who need it right now that don't have water. We have one. Yeah, we have one that runs down County Road 110 from 1140 down to County Road 1110 to the new school. That's the only main that we have. Everything is brand new. We have residents that are asking us right now, when can we get on your system? And our comment is let us make sure that we're nice and stable and running, which we seem to be, and we could do it in emergency situations if we had to at this moment. But I want to give it just a little bit longer to make sure that we're nice and stable and not having to shut them down and turn it back on. So I think there was a, yes.
You mentioned an area affected by chromium. Is there
Yes.
a map of that area?
Yeah, it's not very well shown on this map, but if you look at the little black kind of 8 there, that is the chromium area in the southern part of the district. So EPA currently is working with TCEQ. They're providing filtration systems for the people who live there. The EPA has told us that the minute that we can get a water main to that area, that they'll pay $28 million for distribution, up to $28 million for distribution inside of the plume area to all those residents. That plume continues to grow, just FYI, by about a foot and a half a year. So it's part of it, they know where it came from. Part of it, they're not sure where it came from. Yes, ma'am? Yeah, so we are, it's gonna change a little bit, but let me explain it this way. Setting water rates is probably a pretty difficult process, especially for a new organization that doesn't have any connections or anything of that nature. We're starting up from scratch. We have a company out of Dallas that we are using to help us to figure out what those water rates are going to look like, what connection fees will look like associated with connecting to MCUD. Right now, I will throw a number out there, but a connection fee looking somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,600 for a connection fee for residents. That goes up for commercial properties as in the area, but about $1,600 for that. And then as far as the actual water rate itself, we're working on that number as well. But we're a nonprofit organization. We're going to keep it as low as we possibly can. Right now, we feel like that we can mimic the city of Midland. So that's our goal. Oh, it has a lot to do. There's a lot of calculations in that, right? So it's all about density, and yeah, and us having not the density that say the city of Midland has, yeah, that costs a whole lot more money per household for that to happen. So that's where the bond money comes into play. That's where we try to do it and spread it to everybody instead of just a few. Because if we did that, then your tap fees, heck, they could be over $10,000. I don't know for that, and that's not our goal. Our goal is to make it as reasonable as possible for all of our people, all of our voters. So, yes, sir.
A couple of questions. We got a little time. When you set your rates, will the PUC have anything to do with those rates, or are you independent of that?
We are independent. We do not have to go to the PUC to set rates. That's correct.
Secondly, do you have eminent domain authority?
We do.
You haven't exercised it.
We have not. We have not. We work real closely too with the county. We're hoping that most everything we can do is going to be through county easements, right of ways. So we've worked real close with them, and I see that continuing down the road.
One last question. Do you have any plan? I'm understanding that this is just pure fresh water. Have you got any plans to do regional sanitary plants in the future?
Probably.
The reason that is, it's so important when
Yeah.
you're doing subdivision. Y'all expand, have growth out here like we do. That's the big problem.
When you're not building on acre lots, then you're going to have sanitary sewer, right? So not something are we planning? We're allowing for it. We're not doing a lot of planning at this point, but we are allowing for it. And we're allowing for it in our site designs and things of that nature. Everything that we're doing right now, and again, trying to be transparent and responsible with the taxpayers' money, is that we're building things that are going to take us into the future. We're not building just for the here and now. So that facility is being built for the future. And thank you, Midland County, for doing that. The line going over to the ISD, that came from Greenwood Independent School District, from a construction fund that they had. MCUD, again, we have $2 million coming in a year, a little less than that, and cannot be used for construction anyway. So that's going to cover the operation and maintenance of this facility but it's also going to cost a little bit more than what that is coming in. So partnerships are critical. They have to remain critical, and we have to all learn to work together. And I think we're all doing it very well. And I look forward to the future out here. It's been again a great journey so far, and
We are going to continue with our speakers. All right. Hope everyone had a good lunch. Like I said, continue to keep eating if you're not finished yet. But it is my honor to bring up our next speaker. She is with us from Texas REALTORS. She's the Director of Public Policy for Texas REALTORS. Everyone help me welcome my new friend, Julia Parento.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be a part of this program. When Kelsey called, I was a little bit worried, and I'll tell you as a preview of my presentation, I am not your technical water gal. You have a wealth of speakers here for that today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the state legislature, how that works, how they decide what they do, and how Texas REALTORS is involved in that whole process. But loving the program so far. I've made a lot of notes, and it's fantastic to see an agenda of speakers that keeps Cameron in the room. This is the longest I've seen you sit in one place. So yeah, it's great. So you've learned so much already today about our water systems, our challenges. I think that even before you got here today, none of y'all are strangers to the idea that water availability is an issue in this state, and particularly in your region. And I want to start by just giving some assurances that the issue of water, clean water, available water, water for us as regular residential consumers and for the industries that drive our state's economy is a huge top priority for your state legislators. And what's really cool about being able to talk about this in West Texas is the leadership that y'all have in the legislature on this particular topic is really incredible. You had Senator Sparks here earlier today, and he is also the chair of your Natural Resources Committee, which actually, despite the name, focuses more on the oil and gas side of things, but there is absolutely a nexus with water use in that, of course. You also have Chairman Perry out of Lubbock, and he is the chair of that Water, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs, excuse me, I almost confused the two committees again. That is the committee through which all of those water infrastructure bills ran. Senator Perry is the lead guy in the Senate when it comes to water issues. His counterpart, it's worth noting, in the House is Cody Harris. Now, Cody Harris is out of East Texas. He's one of those East Texas legislators that Dr. Porter mentioned earlier. And I want to mention him because while he is not of your region here, Cody Harris is a realtor. He is a farm and ranch realtor, has been for years. He's a former TREPAC trustee. And so while he might come from a different geological environment than y'all, he absolutely understands the business of real estate, and being able to have him and Senator Perry and Senator Sparks be the guys that are really working through all of these complicated issues is such a boon for real estate in Texas. So I just want to say that. And of course, you also have Dustin Burrows, who is the Speaker of the House out of Lubbock. So West Texas is so well represented when it comes to water debates in the Texas legislature. I just want to make sure that y'all have some confidence in how that's going. We are all deeply suspicious oftentimes of our politicians, and I get that, but you've got good people here, and so take confidence in that. So I want to talk a little bit about what happened. Senator Sparks and Dr. Porter kind of mentioned some legislation that was worked on last session. So Senate Bill 7, House Joint Resolution 7 that Senator Sparks talked about, which created that massive water infrastructure package that then became Prop 4 that we all voted on. Got it passed by 70%, by the way, which is fantastic. Senator Sparks mentioned that no one's getting their name on plaques for figuring out how to fix our pipes under the ground, and that is absolutely true. It's one of the things that we talk to our realtor members about all across the state as much as we can, that it is very, very difficult for public officials at any level, local, state, and federal, to pass legislation that costs a boatload of money. Because we as taxpayers know that that money is coming from us. We don't trust the government super much to actually spend it wisely. Even if we need it, those factors make it really politically challenging, especially in a fiscally conservative state like Texas, to get something like that over the finish line. So to have a package of legislation that injects billions of dollars into a largely invisible infrastructure system is a great accomplishment and one that we should all be very proud of and excited about. It is not sexy, but it is so necessary. And we were really proud to be able to support that. We were one of two groups that really led the way for our public engagement on Proposition 4 to make sure that passed with a really healthy margin. But unfortunately, it is, pun absolutely intended, a drop in the bucket. I read a thing just as I was sitting down here this morning that the new estimates for what our water infrastructure spending needs are for the next, 2026, roughly 30 years, are now inching closer to $175 billion. So when we were talking about Senate Bill 7 last session, we were estimating about $150 billion. So that legislation is putting in $1 billion a year with an initial infusion that was $2 billion. But that's $20 billion out of a projected need of $174 billion. What are we going to do? I don't have an answer for that. That is where my optimism ends for y'all today. And I do think, I was going to get to this a little bit later, but I don't know that you'll see the legislature come back and approve another giant pot of money for water infrastructure next session. They did a huge lift last year. It's hard to do, and they have a whole other set of issues related to water to talk about now. So we're going to have to figure out how we use those billions of the $1 billion annually now for the next 20 years, use those funds very, very wisely, and figure out where we can draw additional dollars from. There were also, so Dr. Porter talked about some of this, and so I hate to repeat what he said, so I'll try to say it in a little bit of a different way. After the legislative session, the regular one was over, we had two special sessions. And the first special session happened, it was going to happen anyway. It was on different issues than this. But in the midst of the governor calling the first special session was when the issue cropped up in East Texas, wherein that private landowner, Mr. Bass, proposed to draw quite a lot of water, high capacity water, checking to see what the capacity of that aquifer could be for drawing out billions of gallons and potentially transferring it across the state to Dallas. Dr. Porter alluded to this. The folks who live in that area got real protective real fast and said, absolutely the hell not. We got to hang on for a second. Now, there is a groundwater conservation district there. And that the interactions between the property owners, the applicant, and the district were kind of what led to that package of bills that Cody Harris filed during the first special session. He he actually filed 6, but there were 4 that were a little bit more specific in a broad way to what was happening in East Texas, one that was very specific to what was happening in East Texas, and then a couple that really drove into the heart of water rights and the history of water access in Texas. So he was looking at primarily how groundwater conservation districts can be a little bit more thoughtful and maybe a little bit more in control of the decisions that are made about water permitting in their areas. There was a bill that, as Dr. Porter mentioned, that would have said you cannot transfer water out of those districts if it was to be in excess of the 5% of the modeled availability. There's another bill that would have required a supermajority vote, 2/3 vote, if there is a shared management area of that groundwater. I lost my notes, hang on. I want to make sure I'm reading them accurately because I wrote them not in the right order. There we go. Then there was a limitation on liability for the groundwater conservation districts if they were to deny permits. And that was because this gentleman who was proposing that large-scale water draw from that aquifer sued them immediately after they said no. And rightly so. That is the system we have currently. He has the right to capture that as a landowner in that area. And when the Groundwater Conservation District said no, he said, lawsuits. So that lawsuit was filed in November of last year, but we knew it was coming months before that. And so that was where that legislation came from. And then there was the rule of capture. And this is one that I personally think is so fascinating, so interesting, and I don't know yet if the legislature will actually wind up taking this up. I've gone back and forth. If you had asked me, 10 months ago, I would have said, hell yeah, they're gonna go full force on this. Then I would have said, attention's drifted away for a little while, and I would have said, well, that is a very big fridge to tip over, especially because rule of capture, not necessarily the way that draft legislation was written, but the rule of capture as a philosophy also impacts oil and gas and other mineral rights. And so, as y'all are working professionals in real estate in West Texas, imagine what opening that door would be like in the legislature. All hell would break loose. And I love drama when it's not our drama, but that would be our drama, and we don't need that in our lives. But that's not to say they won't do it. The legislation that Representative Harris put in was specific to water. It kind of axed out all of the other minerals that could be caught up in rule of capture. Still, though, as we are seeing, everyone is very, very, very defensive of their water. And again, rightly so. This is a life or death situation. But we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So none of those bills went anywhere. And I will say, just as a note for how the legislature works, it is worth everybody knowing that sometimes our state representatives and our state senators file legislation to make a point, to get under people's skin, to start a conversation, if you will, when they don't actually expect that those pieces of legislation will go anywhere or will pass. So they may not ever say that publicly, but you guys should know. That's how the process works. So I would suspect, unconfirmed, but somewhere in that package of legislation was designed to maybe just poke at some of the other parties who were involved in that local fight. The philosophy still stands, though. We have to figure out what we're going to do with water rights going forward. So in addition to that, then we were seeing some building moratoriums happening. Moratoria wherein building permits were cut off because the cities are saying, we do not have water available, we cannot build any more houses. This was happening a lot outside of Houston. We were seeing this in Montgomery County quite a bit, but not just there. There are parts of North Texas that were starting to talk about building moratoria. That concerns people, right? We have an incredibly high demand for housing all across Texas. And when you start saying an entire city, an entire region, we're not going to issue any more building permits, especially in our fast growth areas, people panic a little bit. And that was even before data centers entered the chat. We, of course, also have talked a bit today about the situation in Corpus Christi. I don't know, I'm going to look at you, Dr. Porter, if we have really ever seen a city so at risk in our history, a city where people are, we are seriously worried that they are not going to have a water supply, not in years, but in months. And that is truly an insane situation to be contemplating. My parents live out of state, and they had come to visit with their college friends, and they all went down to Rockport and stayed at the beach in February, right before all of that news really broke about Corpus, literally a week before. And I'm just like, dang, it is a good thing that you guys got in and out of there while you could, because this got real dramatic real fast. And we are, just as an aside again, we are working with our local association partners down there to try to help them figure out how they can be good partners with the city and figure out a pathway forward. Hang on a second, you can't do that. But the issue of data centers is incredibly political right now. They are, as just a vague concept, deeply unpopular with a lot of voters. There is an election happening right now, as you heard at the beginning of the session. And so everybody who would ordinarily be involved in having those conversations also has political interests that they are trying to manage. So I would expect that we don't see any state commentary on Hill County until at least next Wednesday. Your election day for the runoffs is next Tuesday, May 26th. So after that, then maybe we'll see if the state wants to come in and have some thoughts about that. So we'll talk a little bit about what the legislature actually does right now, because we are not in session. We will not be in legislative session until January of next year. I always hope everybody knows, but just in case, high school civics is long out of your head. The legislature only meets every other year in Texas for up to 140 days, starting the second Tuesday in January through whatever 140 days is after that. It's typically Memorial Day that it ends on. Last year, we got the one weird calendar where January started so late that we actually went a week into June, but for the most part, it's going to end on Memorial Day. But that means that we have 18 months, special sessions notwithstanding, where the legislature isn't in session. They are not making laws. They are not they are not being able to make decisions on the issues that we are talking about out in our communities. And when people say, well, why doesn't the state do something about this? They can't for another year, at least. There are pros and cons to this system, but generally we have been, the more frequently they're in Austin, the more trouble they cause. And I think that was the philosophy of the founders when they first put that into place. But it does leave us kind of in a lurch when stuff goes down. So what does happen, though, is the legislature has interim hearings. Their committees meet. Senator Sparks' Natural Resources Committee will meet. The water committee that he mentioned has met and will be meeting. They have listening sessions. They call in experts. They do deeper dives into the policy topics that we are concerned about. And I think it's worth noting what that water committee in the Senate, they get interim charges. I should back up and say the lieutenant governor in the Senate and the speaker of the House give a list of things that they want all of their committees to discuss here in the interim. And so the water committee in the Senate in particular has been tasked with looking into they want them to evaluate the viability and regulatory efficiency of desalination plants. They are to study the issue of utility revenue for infrastructure maintenance, specifically how cities are managing their money for water and wastewater treatment programs. And they have also been asked to look at, well, officially what it says is they are tasked with assessing the water demands of energy-intensive technologies. That's data centers. So the first two that I mentioned were actually heard in the Senate Water Committee on May 11th, just last week. And then the data center one will be September 1st. You can live stream it if you want to, senate.texas.gov. And then you just go to live broadcasts and you can watch the whole thing. It will be very nerdy. The House also does the same thing, and they have already had a hearing on the electrical use of data centers, but they will be studying the water side as well. And the Senate is going to be studying the tax abatement side of data centers. I am jumping ahead of myself a little bit. Before I get all the way into data centers, though, I want to talk a little bit more about what the legislature and Texas Realtors does generally. So where we come in is we are your advocacy organization at the state legislature. It is my job to take your thoughts, your concerns, your expertise in real estate and communicate that to the legislators as they are considering these policy topics and make sure that they don't do anything stupid like pass laws that would harm real estate in Texas. It is not that simple, of course, because not harming real estate in Texas is a very complicated issue. And we have property rights, we have community development, we have infrastructure spending, and a whole host of other things that all pile on top of one another that we have to pay attention to make sure that things, generally speaking, stay on the right track. So it is my job to communicate that, but it is not my job to tell the legislature what Texas Realtors want. That's where y'all come in. And we have a robust policy committee process. Cameron Willman is your 2026 Policy Oversight Committee Chair, and I'll talk more a little bit about his role. But a number of you in this room right now also are currently serving on some of our policy committees. Dr. Porter has been a member of our policy committees in the past. And those committees meet and do their own interim study, just like the legislature. We hear issues, we hear from outside experts, we debate about what is the right position for Texas Realtors to take. And at the end of a 6-month period of those kinds of meetings, the committees get together and write down what Texas Realtors' position at the legislature should be on any given issue. We have one on water. I will say that our infrastructure committee right now is still in that process. It is an open policy that they are still planning on potentially tweaking or rewriting. You can find the one that we used for last legislative session and all of our policy positions at texasrealestate.com/issues. So it's a whole book. It's like 28 pages because there's a lot of topics that real estate touches. And that's available to the public. We don't hide that behind a firewall, so you can share it with whomever you want. But I think if you go through there, you'll see kind of a rundown. You'll get a really good picture of what our committees have given us as directives over the years for how we approach the legislature on all of these policy topics. I was going to read the water one as it stands to you right now, but it actually is pretty long. Had I been thinking about it, I would have put it up on the screen. But as I said, it is in process of being tweaked. But effectively, here's a couple of highlights of what it says. Texas Realtors supports timely investment in our aging infrastructure systems to prevent failures that could harm residents and businesses, prioritizing both new and existing water supplies as demand throughout the state increases, exploration of innovative technologies to ensure that current and future Texans have consistent access to clean water, an investment in sustainable practices such as additional water reclamation and reuse to increase water supplies. There's more to it than that, but that's the first list of bullet points. And we wrote that before the legislature met last year, before Senate Bill 7 was written, before any of the desal conversation was happening in Corpus Christi. Well, not really before then, but you know what I mean, not in a big way. And so that is the work that your colleagues are doing on the policy committees is writing that kind of statement to direct how I go then and work with the state legislature. And so we're very proud of it, and we hope you are too. And if you have thoughts on what this position or any of our other ones should be, you can always call me. And we're going to do a survey over the summer. More on that later. But we are really, really actively taking your input, your expertise to the legislature to make sure that the realtor voice is heard. And it's not just the realtor voice. You know more about what your clients need, what they're worried about, how they're feeling about the health of their communities in the world, really than any other constituent group that goes to the Capitol. And so it is of utmost importance that you keep in contact with me and tell me about what's happening in your life and what you're seeing, and make sure that we are getting all of that information so we can share it with your elected officials. That is your second part of homework for the day, is also become new friends with me, just like Kelsey. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about data centers before I run out of time, because we could be here all day. Because we can't talk about water in Texas right now without talking about that, of course. So this is not new today, it's not new this month, and we are very excited that Cameron and his leadership and our leadership team at the association decided that this was such an important topic that we needed a new committee about it. So we formed a data center policy subcommittee in February, and they have been meeting in earnest since then. They have had several in-person meetings with experts on all sides of the issue, and we are working on formulating a position statement on how we feel about, broadly, the issue of data centers and how they might be regulated at the state legislature for the health and benefit of our communities. The state legislature is not going to be able to do everything about this. It will remain a local issue as well, and so that is where y'all will come in at, making sure that you are paying attention and determining what is best for your communities. But there will be bills about this at the state legislature this year, and we want to make sure that, again, Texas Realtors' voice is heard in that, and that we are setting ourselves up to be the experts that we know you are when it comes to that topic, because it is absolutely a real estate issue. One of our coworkers is very fond of saying that real estate derives its value from water, which is an alternative way of what Dr. Porter had said earlier, that all of our real estate really ties back to the availability of water. And so as we think about these developments, particularly the large-scale ones, and I think this is something that is really important for y'all to remember about data centers, is that is a very broad term. That means a lot of things. There are small ones that have been built for years that are within cities, within suburbs that you probably would never know are there. But what's getting the attention right now is the Metas, the Stargates, these giant hyperscaler projects that are being proposed on the fringes of our rural communities, which is scary for a lot of people, understandably so. And I was glad to hear Dr. Porter talk a little bit about the red herring of water in data centers. We went into this really not knowing anything, but we've had folks both from the data center side of it. We had a speaker from Ecolab who is hired by data center companies to engineer their water cooling systems, come and explain how all that works. And we actually had, you had a screenshot of the Houston Advanced Research Council, their thirsty data report that was written in January. We had the author of that report come and speak to the committee as well. Everybody involved has said that, yeah, water is an issue, but it's not nearly the issue that it has been made out to be with data centers. The technology is advancing very, very quickly. The gel cooling thing that Dr. Porter talked about, where they're actually encasing these chips in a slurry, I don't know the right words, is very cool and happening quickly. And we're seeing that the water use for these, even the really large-scale products, is diminishing drastically. And also, I mean, think about it. You're going to talk about the cost to produce water, and we heard a little bit about that earlier. It makes no economic sense for these companies to be literally dumping dollars down the drain. So they have a financial interest in making sure that their systems are as efficient as possible. What we are hearing about is that electricity is a problem, and electrical generation, and how we power these things without completely disrupting our grid. There was legislation on that last session. It is very complex, and I will not do a great job of giving you details on it, but Senate Bill 6, it was called, was passed, and that basically says that these data centers are going to have some kind of capacity to go off of our grid and not screw all of the rest of us up when stuff goes down. Again, way more complex than that, but that did pass, so that is an expectation that these companies are already being held to, for whatever that's worth. Again, I don't know what Texas Realtors, what our committees will eventually recommend when it comes to a position on data centers. It will be written broadly, because there will be a lot of nuance in the legislation that's filed, and we want to make sure that we can take your voice to all of those different discussions. But I suspect that where they'll get to is something that effectively says that data centers can be a benefit to Texas communities if. What the if is, we still have to determine that. But if these conditions are met, if the utilities are available, if the water is available, if we can make sure that the systems are recycling our water, that it's not going to tank the grid, that it's not going to cost our electrical or our water consumers a whole bunch more money just because this other big project came in. One of my hopes, just to let y'all know, is that we are also going to develop a kind of a resource guide for y'all to use. So a data center is proposed near me. What do I need to ask? We'll work on that in the next couple of weeks into the summer. But as I said, this will continue to be a local issue, and so we want to make sure that y'all have the resources that you need in order to be able to engage thoughtfully when there is a proposal in your community. And I do think it's also worth mentioning, Dr. Porter mentioned kind of the speculative nature of this, and this is anecdotal, I don't have data on this, but I do think, when you hear these numbers, like 400, 500, 900 data centers are being proposed in Texas, I don't think that's exactly accurate. I don't think we're going to have 900 data centers be built in the next year. I think that the companies are looking at multiple areas, multiple regions, figuring out, kind of putting feelers out in a lot of those areas to see what might work. And so they might be looking at 4 or 5 different areas, and only one might be the one that's viable at the end. But for the time being, it looks like they are proposing 5. Again, anecdotal, I don't have data on that, but that's just the way that the folks are talking about how they're doing these proposals. I think that is likely what's happening there, and why those numbers might be just a skosh inflated. So, that is a little bit about where Texas Realtors is at, how we engage with the legislature, how we are talking about water. I would love to answer questions. When Kelsey and I were talking about this, we did talk a little bit about, it's been a while since I've been able to come speak to y'all here too, so if you just want to ask about legislative drama, Senator Sparks left the room so we can talk freely. Does anyone have any questions? I don't believe you. Okay, well, if not, I will be here. Since I invited you to become new best friends, please take my contact information. You can reach me at julia@texasrealtors.com. Very easy. I will give you my phone number if you want to write that down. It is 512-751-2028. If you want to be a bit more generic, we actually have an email for our whole policy team as well, if you want to just, throw it out into the world and see what sticks. That's policy@texasrealtors.com. That gets us and a couple of members of our legal team. So if you want to email a whole group any questions, please do. Kelsey, please.
Can I ask you like a very general?
Absolutely.
Nothing to do with water. If one of our members was curious about getting started in Texas Realtors,
Yeah.
and maybe wanted to join a committee, what would you suggest they do? Or maybe what committee?
So the question was, for those in the back, if a realtor wanted to get more involved in Texas Realtors, what should they do? And thank you for that, because it is very timely. We are right now in our open committee application process for our 2027 committees. It runs until June 30th. So that does include our 4 standing policy committees, which are business issues, infrastructure, land use, and taxation. And I think that there are members of each of every single one of those committees in this room right now, so I won't call everybody out, but if you want to learn more, we've got a list. We find that most of the policy issues that come before Texas Realtors fit into one of those 4 categories. If they may fit into a couple of the categories, that was actually part of where the data center subcommittee came from. When we started looking at that issue, we found that we could have put data centers into every single one of those committees, and so it just made sense to make their own. We actually pulled members from each of those committees to form the subcommittee. But those committees are roughly about 25 members apiece. It is a 2-year term, so you would start in 2027 and end in 2028. The time commitment is actually pretty minimal. When the legislature is in session, so in 2027, we really don't have our policy committees meet. Frankly, my attention is elsewhere, and there is not that much for y'all to do. We try to keep you advised on what the legislature is doing in each of the committee spaces, but you're not having meetings all the time. So really, the time commitment for those committees is in the even years, January to May. That is when we have the vast majority of our meetings where we're inviting in our outside experts and debating all of those issues. And in fact, I am going to sit out in the hall after this session is over and meet with our land use committee and start writing their policy positions over Zoom today. So that will conclude actually next week, that whole process. So that's your timeline if you want to consider serving on one of those committees. Again, they're not huge, and they're 2-year terms that are staggered, so we have about half the committee that is up for reappointment each year, so 12, 13 people. If you do want to apply for one of those committees, feel free to reach out. Definitely tell me why you want that committee in your application. Just write a little note about why you think taxation sounds cool or whatever it is that you're applying for. That helps us see that it is something that you really want to do. So that is, honestly, the policy committees are a fantastic space for people who maybe have not been engaged in a volunteer way with Texas Realtors yet, and you want to get that started. It's relatively low impact, and it's stuff that you already know about. You know, you bring the expertise to those committees. So please consider that. There are some other ones, but I can tell you more about those later. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I will be here. Please feel free to ask questions later.
Thank you, Julia. Julia and Dr. Porter both came in from the Austin area, so we're very thankful that they traveled to come see us. I'm going to do this annoying thing again. If you're on a Texas Realtors committee, would you please raise your hand? If you want to get involved in Texas Realtors, these are the people you should talk to. I would highly encourage, obviously I encourage you to get involved at our local level, of course, but if you're wanting to take it up to the next level and want to get involved with Texas Realtors, those are the people that you need to talk to. Okay, everybody say a quiet prayer and hope that I can connect my computer. Trisha, don't laugh or I'm going to make you come do it. Here's your water if you need it. And then you can just hit this or the return button, either one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, this is Carl Crago. He's with the City of Midland.
So coming into this building gives some very bad memories. I don't know if many of you knew, about 6 years ago, we flooded this building. We turned the basement into a pool. So I don't really like coming in here all that often. A water main broke in their non-basement and on that side and turned the stairs into a waterfall. So it was crazy. It's on Facebook if anybody ever wants to look it up. So Carl Crago, Public Works Officer for the City of Midland, and let me tie myself a little bit to real estate. So I've been married for 24 years. We've lived in 6 states, 9 cities, and I've moved into 15 houses. So I've dealt in a little bit of real estate, and that's how it ties me into. So I'll move into the presentation, but sometimes when I give these presentations, there is somebody just really wanting to have a question to start out. Is there anybody out there that has a question they would like to hear from before I get started? Midland is by far the best place I've ever lived. My son is becoming a fireman for the City of Midland, and one of his childhood friends is not here anymore, but he's actually a realtor in this group. So we've really liked it a lot. So the state of water. I like to talk about water, of course. That's where I started. I was the utilities director. I am still the utilities director, but I also have engineering, solid waste, and capital improvements under me, and just manage those with their own directors. I like to start these out by saying it costs $2.4 million a month just to get water to Midland. That's not to treat it. That's not to pay for our workers. That's not to distribute it. That is just getting it here and then getting it through the system. So water here is very expensive, so please don't ask me questions about your bill. So just really, this is just the outline, but the city likes to tie everything to our strategic plan. When our new city manager came in, we had a very loosey-goosey strategic plan, and he really brought us to the table and put a strategic plan together. So everything we do, everything about water, streets, it is tied to that strategic plan. I mainly say my strategic plan is number 6, and it's infrastructure. So what are we doing? So I have heard from a lot up here, all these counties that are having problems with water. The City of Midland is probably in one of the best locations in the entire state, and I know this because I work on the state water plan. When we talk to our state water plan representative, they can't believe the plans we have in place that ensure that we have 100 years of water. So we have about 70% of our water supply comes from surface water, 30% comes from groundwater. Did anybody here know that we own 16.7% of Lake Ivy? So we own part of that lake. We're just not customers, and we own 20 million gallons a day in a pipeline to bring that water up here. So we as a city had for years tried to make sure we were ahead of the game. Our T-bar well system that brings 30% of the water into the city, we bought in 1963. We ensured, our past people ensured that we had water today. We turned that water source on in 2013 and have been using it since then. We manage that really well. It is groundwater. We only use about 5 to 7 million gallons a day from there because we want to use the surface water. Most people don't know, you actually lose to evaporation more water than all the cities use when you're talking about surface water. So if you think about CRMWD, those lakes, there's 5 cities, I think, that use that. More water is evaporated than we actually use out of that. So it's better if we use it so it doesn't evaporate. Our collaboration. I don't know if anybody's heard the West Texas Water Partnership. That is us, San Angelo, and Abilene. We're all owners of Lake Ivy. We're 50% and CRMWD is 50%, but we also came together to find a water source. It took us 20 years. I've been here 10 years, so it's taken us 20 years to get this source about 3 years ago. So, okay, maybe 18 years. But that's Fort Stockton Holdings. That's a water source we keep on reserve. That's what we call our 100-year water source. And the reason we call that is, we've talked about mining of water. That is actually one source that is a natural spring underground, and it has been shown to have water since the Spanish Inquisitors, I can't say that word, down in that area. So where we have the water, it's running in a river underground, and once it leaves the area we have, it actually becomes very brackish water. It goes through a very salty mineral deposit and turns really salty. So when we start bringing that water online, that's going to be a reusable groundwater source, which there is not many of those in the state. Oh, infrastructure modernization. I like to talk about, so we talked about water supply, water we've owned for years, but where else is your water sources? It's not losing the water you have. The city of Midland spends at least $6 million a day on 3 programs to change out water mains and to fix wastewater manholes. We just make sure that that water stays in our system so we can use it properly as we should. So what's our vision? What's our vision for the next 5 years? So the city of Midland owns another source north of us, about 17 miles, called Paul Davis. Some of you are probably old enough to remember you would get letters every single month that there's arsenic in our water. So that was the Paul Davis water source. We stopped using that water source about 10 years ago. And in the next 5 years, we're actually planning on an RO plant and brand new wells in that area to bring that source back online, another 10 million gallons a day coming to Midland. So what that is we use on average 29 million gallons a day, so it's a third of our use that we're gonna bring up online in a source that we own, well, that we lease, but we own the land, and it makes sure that we have another third of water. So innovative water projects. What I like to talk about, some people have probably heard me talk, oh, that's not here yet, hold on, I'm sorry. That is, we're of course looking at everything. So we're looking at our water, our wastewater effluent. Do we do something with that? So some of you may know from the news, Pioneer, now Exxon, actually upgraded our wastewater plant to a water reclamation facility. They put in $131 million into that plant to use that water in the fracking industry. Pioneer didn't use it, and Exxon barely uses it. So we're trying to work with them to see if there's a better use for that water in the city or in the county. And I think you may have heard the county MCUD talk about that a little bit earlier. So water sources, I've talked about where they're all at. I just wanted to show you in the map. I think this map was up a little bit earlier, but like I said, 70% of it comes from Lake Thomas, Lake Spence, and Lake Ivy. Most of that's Lake Thomas and Lake Spence. We keep Ivy in reserve. And then we have our groundwater sources. I talked about Paul Davis. That in the next 5 years is going to come back online. And then most of it comes from T-bar and Clearwater. They're T-bar. They're the same water source. We just call them all one together. And then our future source, the Fort Stockton water source. I already went over that. So infrastructure modernization. Let me talk about how we're keeping that water in our system. Can you see at all the years on some of these white pipelines? I don't know if you guys can see that up there. We have pipelines that's been in the ground since the 30s, and they're old, but we have been spending $6 million since I've been here. That's 10 years. We've probably replaced about 20% of our system. Some other things we're doing to make sure we keep that water in the pipelines is we are the second city in the state. We use a satellite leak detection, meaning the company that found water on Mars, they have worked with NASA, and they use NASA's satellites, and they scan, if you pay for them, of course. They will scan your city, and they can see chlorine residual up to 10 feet in the ground, and then they'll come and pinpoint where there's a water main break or an underground water main break. So what that helps us with, we found in the past 2 flyovers, we've had 3 so far, but the third one I haven't got the information for yet, but in the past 2, we found 32 underground water main breaks. They're not breaks, water main leaks that allowed us to get to that water main break before it became a big break and caused a lot of water loss. A break normally that you've seen is about 500,000 gallons to 1 million gallons you lose in a water main break because it takes a bit of time to get those valves shut down because we're so interconnected. We also have deployed 35 pressure monitors in our system. We're going to have 73. These pressure monitors gives us active reading and sends me and a few other people a text if we get a spike in a certain area of town. If there's 3 of those monitors that spike, that means we probably had a water main break out there. So we send crews out into that area of town to look around just in case someone hasn't called us yet about a water main break. So we're making sure that we keep the water in the system because water loss, when you spend 2.4 million gallons a month just to get our water here, water loss is a bad thing for us. We just don't like it. So drought preparation. We've talked about drought all the time. Luckily, and this is an old map. You showed the newer one earlier. Luckily, our lakes have gotten more rain this year than Midland has. And please look at your phones. It looks like it's going to rain the next 2 days. Let's get that rain. We really need it. And we really like the lakes to get filled up. But we are preparing for drought. So we are not in water restrictions right now. We're in voluntary water restrictions right now. But we have a set plan where we may need to go back to watering 3 times a week, watering 2 times a week, and it's mainly irrigation. The doctor was correct. 55 to 60% of water use, even in Midland, is irrigation. It's on everybody's grass. So when I say we push out 29 million gallons from the water plant, the wastewater plant only treats 10.5 to 11 million gallons. We're not drinking all that water. It's going to somewhere else. So a little bit about the water reclamation facility. As I talked about, Pioneer, now Exxon, helped us get that cleaned up. Get a new secondary treatment to allow that water to be cleaned up to use in fracking. Again, like I said, we're looking at other ways to use that water, but we have to work with Exxon on that, and it's a new relationship. It wasn't that long ago when they bought Pioneer. So community impact. So this utility is 127 employees. We have about 30 open positions. So if anybody knows anybody needs a job, please call me. But we are a 24/7 facility, both the water plant, the wastewater plant, and the people that go out there and fix the pipes when they break. I like to bring up 2 Marches ago, we had some water pressure issues in town. We had a very big water valve that broke out on 158 in kind of Wadley area. That water main broke. It caused pressure issues on the west side of town. Those guys were out there for 36 hours straight to ensure, A, we didn't have to do a boil water notice, and B, they got that fixed as fast as possible. So their impact to the community, making sure that everybody has the water they need when they need it, we're really pushing for that. And I went through that way faster than I thought I would. But overall, what kind of questions do you have? I was very surprised nobody asked the MCUD guy a question about the GACs, the groundwater assessment certification. Do you guys work with that at all as realtors, where you have to, if you're separating land out in the county and you're dealing with groundwater, you actually have to prove that there's 30 years of groundwater in that development before you can plat it? Nobody has a question on that. It's the entire state. So even in the city limits, if you're in an area in the city limits that doesn't yet have water lines, because there is some that doesn't have water lines, and you go to plat that property, mainly to sell it, is what most people do, you have to ensure that either A, the city's coming to you, or an MCUD's coming to you, or a geologist or a professional engineer proves that there's 30 years worth of water in that platted area. It's been a very surprising, it's only been going on for about a year and a half now, here that is. I think it's been actually 2 years, but it has been a surprise to a lot of people when they go to plat. So don't let your customers be surprised. Not residential resale, it's the development stage. Yeah, they're fizzling out a lot. There's a lot, well, we've only had like one or two in the city limits, but I deal with the ETJ, so I'm actually the person for the city that looks at all those reports. They're fun to look at. They're super exciting. Yes. So overall, if you add all those lakes together, I have that meeting tomorrow, but the last meeting last month, we were at 35%. I don't know the numbers for each one off the top of my head, but overall, they're about 35%. Yes. Now, we've been at 35% because of some rains and not rains. We've been at 35% for like 5 years. So as long as we get average rains, the lakes are showing to be good through late 2028, early 2029. That's not average rain, that's no rain. In that area is when we'd start having to look, we'd have to get off of surf water. They show if we have an average rain, if we have an average rain, those lakes are good, just average rain, through 2032 to 2033. Just depending on so we always forecast those with how much rain we may or may not get. And anybody know what the average rain in Midland, Texas is? 13 inches. That's the average. We haven't got it in a while. But I think 2016 is the last time we got the average rain. We're closer to about 132 gallons per day. Our focus is to get us down to 110 if we can. So we forecast our water supply based off that consumption to see how we are good. But that when we just did because we just did our water use and water loss, you have to do that every year for the state. And we were at about 132. We use a lot of water on grass. So there's many uses a city can do. So you can do a purple pipe system, which means you treat it to a point where you could take it to your golf course or your parks and irrigate the grass like that. A city can look at indirect potable reuse, which that would mean you treat it to a point where it can go into a surface water body. So we have a reservoir, a 95 million gallon reservoir. We could treat it to a point, mix it with surface water, and then take it back through the water plant and treat it. Or you can do direct potable reuse, which that is taking it from the wastewater plant, doing RO, so reverse osmosis, and it's then to clean drinking water standards, and it goes straight back into the system. So we're looking at all three of those to see what makes sense, depending on working with Exxon to see if they want to provide any of those water rights back for us. Even if they don't, in 40 years, we could look at it then also. Zebra mussels. So Lake Ivy, our wonderful Lake Ivy, about 4 years ago, they saw a single zebra mussel in their inspection. So nobody called red flags. It was a single zebra mussel. They figured it's not really here yet. Well, the zebra mussels exploded that year into that winter. And it happened to be a year when the Lake Thomas and Lake Spence system was shut down. So the city was totally on Lake Ivy in the worst possible time that it could be on Lake Ivy. So we, not only CRMWD, but our plant got overran by the zebra mussel. So when I talk about March 2 years ago, where I said that valve broke, the reason that was such a big deal, the plant was down to a fourth of its capacity, meaning it can treat 32 million gallons. We could only do 8 million gallons because we were cleaning up the zebra mussels. And when the water valve broke that allowed T-bar groundwater into our system, it cut our capacity down to, 15 million gallons a day. We were using 18 to 19 million gallons a day. So we played that balancing act for 2 or 3 days before we finally figured out how to get the situation fixed. Now, so we're both treating for zebra mussels now. It's copper sulfate is the treatment. So once they just started, so CRMWD just started this spring. They were supposed to start last fall, and supply and demand, they couldn't get the stuff that they needed. So they started this spring, so hopefully they get it to the point where we can stop treating for them also. But you have to catch them in their breeding cycle, which is right now. I don't like zebra mussels. Yep. Okay, so I can go, I'll do a really quick overview. 2016, this all started. Pioneer came to us wanting to use our wastewater, treat our wastewater and use it in fracking. Mainly because back then in 2016, if anybody's in the industry, recycling was a very small portion of their produced water. So this water looked great to them to treat it, because they were already doing it with Odessa, to treat it and put it into their system and use it for fracking. That project, that contract took till 2021 before that plant was finally built and ready to use. 2021, recycling has already become a really big thing in the oil industry, but they already spent $131 million to bring our plant online. So they have contracted 15 million gallons a day that they can use in their system, so they can pipe it to a pond they have behind our plant and then put it in their water system they have in a good part of this state. Once it leaves our plant, it actually becomes Railroad Commission controlled water, not controlled, but permitted water, and it's TCQ inside the plant. They almost don't use any of it. So so what they call us now is their spiking water. So if they're really going to town on putting in oil wells, they'll ask us for spiking water. I think the first time they've taken it this year was like 3 weeks ago, and then they've stopped taking it from there. So I don't think Exxon was telling you this, but an ex-Pioneer guy said it was a great idea in 2016. In 2021, would they have thought about it then? It probably wouldn't have happened. So overall, the city got a really nice plant, and somehow we're going to reuse that water differently later. So if they're not using that much now, what's happening with that water? Have you not seen how green the draw is on the southeast side of town? So we still have farming areas, so we use it for farming and for putting into the draw. So a lot of the people in the county that's not used to having water in their draw, there's water in their draw. The Midland Naturalist Society, they really like all the butterflies. They've told me that in these speeches I've given to them. Anyone else?
So you mentioned the 100-year planning strategy. What is the biggest vulnerability that needs to be solved within the next 10 years?
It will be the Paul Davis source I was talking about. So it is a water source that is north of town, very cheap water underground. It's just we need an RO plant to treat with that. So the city has replaced 5 wells up there. We actually put in for House Bill 500. It's the new $1 billion that the Senate gave to the Texas Water Development Board. We're putting in for some grants to put in more water wells up there. And Senator Pfluger actually put the city in for a WARDA. It's a water resource. It's a federal government thing for $75 million to help us put that plant together. So even if none of that comes forward, the city will still look at getting that water source RO'd and online, so that gives us an extra third of our water. Yes? Are you talking about Quail Ridge? Yes, Quail Ridge was, if the GAC was around when Quail Ridge came in, that probably would never have happened. The city is actually taking water to that area. So the city put in a $50 million sewer line on the east side of town. There was no sewer on the east side of town. So once that in, we're now taking water down, and it's Todd Road. We're taking water down Todd Road, so now the east side of town, the undeveloped area of town pretty much, has water and sewer and can develop. So we actually have bid out the first phase of that water line to get across the highway. We're just trying to beat TxDOT with Todd Road. Like they're putting that new overpass in at Todd Road. We're trying to get that water line at least crossed first, and then we're going to go all the way down to Quail Ridge. Yes? No, the city can't help Vander Ranch. So we are not allowed to sell water outside the city limits. So unless they want to annex, which I don't think they do, we can't help outside the city limits. That as MCUT, we've talked to MCUT in the past, but we are held by a bracketing legislation that Craddock did many, many years ago for our PBBOR water source, so a groundwater control district can't come in. So, but it keeps us from selling water outside the city limits if you weren't already connected before 2012. Water's so fun. Everybody good? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Carl. All right, our last speaker is one you got to see earlier, the man who makes me feel really dumb, Dr. Charles Porter. Yep, it's up here. I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. Let me say a couple of things off the bat. I've been to a whole bunch of city meetings about water, and Carl's the most amazing one I've ever heard. He understands your system, he knows how it works, and you're really, really lucky to have him. I wish he was here to hear this. I really mean it. It's amazing how he's got control, understands the whole system. Now, the other thing that I think is wonderful, that as members of Texas Realtors, we've got Julia. She understands what's going on. She pays attention. It's part of her life for us. And believe me, in the last few years in the legislature, you've got to have somebody watching 24/7, 365. It's not that they're wrong, because there's a lot of issues in the state that's growing like we grow. And when I mention things about worried about state policies and things, here, let me put it to you this way. I believe in our system. If the people of Texas want to stop groundwater transfer from district to district, it's okay with me. Maybe a decision I wouldn't agree to, but that's why we have a right to vote, right? And that's what we want to do, and I think it's fine with that. Now, I want to say, since we're a little early, I want to say a little bit about Corpus. Many years ago, not that many years ago, Corpus was the genius city in Texas. You know why? Because a mayor named Mary Rhodes put in a pipeline from Lake Texana to Corpus. They expanded it over to the Baytown area to get more water out of the Colorado River. And Tim Brown, who was a dear friend of mine who passed away, was kind of the dean of water law. He represented them at that time, and it made it happen. In fact, that's still a big saving grace for Corpus right now. And they have a tremendous advantage. And I've been asked to go down there to Corpus at the end of the month of June and talk to the public about my opinions about Corpus water situation and where it is. And I'm going to say right now, the most valuable asset they have other than that pipeline is the right-of-way to that pipeline. Okay? Because right-of-way is something we never think about. I used to hold up two big reports of the Water Development Board and TCEQ, and there's not one phrase that says right-of-way acquisition. But I've worked hard, been lucky. I was hired by the Attorney General's office to work on the Katy Freeway expansion, which to get an extra lane, it took us about 10 years of nightmares up and down. The special commissioners' hearings, and when we all went to trial, they all didn't like my valuation because I said that this old shopping center here and this one here, because of all kinds of headaches with the leases and things, it's not like the Fiesta store on Katy Freeway. Well, sure, you want to be next to the Fiesta store because you can get $28, $30 rents. Well, funny thing, they lost every single case in front of the courts for a bunch of reasons, I could say. But bottom line is, the next spring, Harris County Appraisal District raised all those values based upon what they got from the courts, and every one of them used my and other reports to try to lower the values back to what the reality was. So it's an interesting situation, but I think we need to really think about right-of-way, and it's a very special thing. Now, it took us years to, let me digress a little bit. Back in 2013, I put together a group because I thought, having been involved with the groundwater district associations, Texas Alliance Groundwater Districts, and other groups, I thought it was important that people finally understand what a groundwater conservation district was, at least to be notified. You believe it took us 2 years to get it through, and the legislature passed it. They asked me to be the spokesman in the committee hearings. Y'all can tell I probably have a pretty big mouth, right? You can hear me across the street. But I did not have a political voice without Texas Realtors, Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts, Texas Water Conservation Association. When I stood in front of those committees, they didn't care who I was. I was the voice for about 300,000 people. And that's why what we do as real estate realtors that are members of Texas Realtors, we have a political voice. And the system that set up Texas Realtors, where issues come up through the Government Affairs Committee, and we speak with one voice to the legislature, makes a tremendous difference. Even the Texas Water Conservation Association, we've now changed their name to TWA, which is really the big gorilla to finally deciding water policy, they can't speak with one voice. I'm on a committee there with 95 members, and half of them are lawyers, and they all have their own clients' interests. But I think we don't maybe realize how powerful our tree pack operation is and how we can really change for the people of Texas. Right as we got that done in 2015, some of us started talking about, let's change the contracts. And we got tired of it after a while. It was so hard to move forward. People were against changing the contracts, didn't want another page. But finally, along the way, in 2022, we made progress. They appointed me to the Broker Lawyer Committee as an alternate. I talked so much about it, I made everybody sick, I think. But then things happened. Ron Walker, the great Ron Walker, who was Texas Realtors General Counsel for years, a wonderful man who's now the General Counsel for the Catholic Diocese in Austin, got on the committee, and between John George, Mary Miner, Brian Sledge, who was on our consortium, Leah Martinson, and Sarah Kirkle, after a year and a half, we have these changes in the contract, which I'm going to show you today. I think it was done right because we talked about it ad infinitum. Any of you been on the Broker Lawyer Committee know it's a 7-hour meeting every quarter. And the most important thing about it is you've got to remember is that any time that we have to spend part of our time every time on public comments. So if you have a complaint or some consideration about a contract or something else, send a letter to the Broker Lawyer Committee and detail what your problem is, because we have to go through that every time. And it's a very effective way. So I like the debate about what to do with this contract, but my position was really simple. We've got the Hank Hill propane paragraph, which is now back on TV, the cartoon. We've got an agricultural development district that's never been formed yet in our farm and ranch contracts, and so we argued it out. This is only a disclosure. What is the key word on disclosure notices? The word is sellers, right? Not broker's disclosure. And that's the one thing to really keep in mind about this. It's not you making the disclosure about water, it's the seller. Why is it important? Because on the buyer's agent side, and both seller and buyer's agent, under 531.2 fidelity, we have fiduciary duties to our clients, right? Yet we still have to treat other parties fairly. 535.2 of the Rules of Real Estate Commission says that a broker has the very highest fiduciary duty, right? 535.156 of the Rules of Real Estate Commission reiterates that all agents have a fiduciary duty to their clients. When I helped write broker responsibility a couple of years ago, the manual, I had them put in, if Trek tells you you've got fiduciary duties 3 times, they mean it, and they do. And we added in the definition of scrupulous and meticulous. Under 531.3, integrity, we have to employ prudence and caution so as to avoid misrepresentation in any wise by acts of omission or commission. My argument all along with the Broker Lawyer Committee was, it's an act of omission if you don't talk about water resources, right? It's very important. If you're a buyer's agent and you walk out here to and see you're trying to sell a farm, or you see a farm trying to get your buyer to buy it, you see a center pivot irrigation system out there. it's incumbent on you to ask and say, you need to check and make sure that center pivot has a permit. That's most groundwater, all groundwater conservation district and surface water TCEQ allows you to be exempt from a permit for a domestic livestock use well. But anything other than that has to have a permit. And if your neighbor, who tattles because these groundwater districts don't have the manpower to go out and do individual inspections, when some neighbor tattles on you and turns out that fella doesn't have a permit and your buyer's just purchased it, it can be $5,000 a day in fines. And all this is doing is to add value to our work as brokers, right? If we don't add value to these transactions, the king of the world, secretly, Jeff Bezos, or Zillow, is going to take our business away from us, right? Y'all have all been in this business a long time. How many of y'all been in a situation I have as a commercial agent where you work for the frontage of Onion Creek subdivision? Temple Inn held it back for 30 years, asked me to do it. I worked on it 7 years to get it sold because there were like 700 assistant vice presidents Temple Inland I had to talk to. I didn't get paid a dime for 7 years, you know, so we need to add value to these transactions, and nothing adds more value than helping our clients think about water and infrastructure. So I'll step off my pulpit about that. The Real Estate Commission, back in November, we presented the final changes to the contract after Ron Walker and everyone debated it out. And at the very last minute, we pulled it back from the November commissioners meeting because people were complaining about what the word watercourse meant. So we pulled it back. Ron and Brian Sledge changed it, and we had the water notice finished. So in January, the commissioners approved unanimously the changes to the contract involving water. And there are other changes, too, we won't talk about today. But I know y'all are sick of seeing contract changes, right? It's continually changing, always changing. When I was chairman of the Education Standards Advisory Committee, we added the 3 hours of contract. And I argued strongly, okay, I don't want that 3 hours to be every single contract form. I want it to be 3 hours for the 1 to 4, 3 hours for farm and ranch. Even that's not enough. But the commissioners unanimously approved it in January. January. And then it went to public comment, went into the Texas Register. We were watching the public comment. Chance Brown and others told me before this last meeting in May, they said, Charles, we hadn't had any bad public comment. The realtors have not made comments that were negative towards us, so we think it'll pass. Because there's so many other things at this last commission meeting because everybody's so angry about the problems with the Real Estate Commission website. It's been a nightmare. And it passed. And so I knew originally we thought it would be effective May 4th, but I thought that was way too aggressive. And Chance Browns and others and J.B. Goodman said, let's make it effective July 1. I kind of thought it was going to be more like September. But I think they realized the importance of this in our relationships with our clients. Now I'm going to go over each one of these pages. And I want you to ask questions. I'm going to take it slow. Some of you have already read it, right? Have you taken a class about it? Well, maybe we'll look at it. If you want a little help, I tend to write now and then for the Texas Realtor magazine. I wrote this for Marty Kramer, the editor, back in the early spring, and we've kind of waited to publish it until just the other day because once it passed. And I think Texas Realtor magazine does a fabulous job in the work that they do for us. Not just because I publish in it, but everybody that publishes there pays attention. It's peer-reviewed by the lawyers at Texas Realtors. That makes a big difference. So I think this will be helpful to us. We were careful because that's 2 pages. We always have a very limited number of pages that we could use. All right, here we go. Now, since it's in every contract, unimproved property, 1 to 4, all the contracts, there may be a little bit different paragraph number, but this is the same wording across the board in all the contracts. Okay. It's in the disclosure portion. Seller's disclosure about groundwater and surface water rights. is a seller's water disclosure, right? It's not a broker's lawyer disclosure. Okay, that's really important to keep in mind. Access to surface water or groundwater on the property may be regulated, restricted, or prohibited, included but not limited to the right to drill or operate water wells and the right to withdraw water from surface water sources on or adjoining the property. Now, adjoining the properties was a major issue that maybe y'all have not faced yet. But around Central Texas, we faced some things outside the Austin area where someone will go out and have a larger tract, they'll subdivide half of it, and the groundwater well is on the part that hadn't been plotted. They sell this part, and they hadn't set up easements and maintenance agreements with the subdivision. And you can imagine the instant trouble that starts when the buyer, who's a dentist from Dallas, comes in. I'm not going to let him use my groundwater. So a lot of the reasons all these things, like the GSC, all that's come about, is to avoid those kind of things. Okay. The parties shall use the seller's water disclosures published by TREC to identify information related to groundwater and surface water rights. It's identifying information, not interpreting information. Unless you're a lawyer, a licensed attorney in Texas who has experience in water, or you're a hydrogeologist, don't interpret anything for them. Now, you're going to be asked, well, gosh, Charles, I don't know if I'm in a groundwater conservation district or not. Well, I'll help them find that out. It's pretty easy to do, right? Go to texasgroundwater.org, put in an address, and it's going to pop up. And normally, most of the groundwater districts now, not all, have a website, and another little window will pop up that shows where the website is and where to look at the rules. Again, don't interpret the rules, but you can point your client to it, right? Buyer has received the seller's water disclosure. We'll look at the disclosure in a minute. Buyer has not received the seller's water disclosure. Within X number of days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall deliver the seller's water disclosure to buyer. Okay? The whole idea of property disclosure came from 1993 when we added section 5.08 to the property code. Okay? Seller's disclosure. A minimum, we thought that single-family homes were so valuable to the state of Texas, we wanted to protect people's rights and help them make decisions before they bought the property, right? It's only been changed one time, and that's when we did it in 2015 and added the little question about being in a groundwater district. Here's another thing. Y'all work with these contracts. How many different of those blanks we got to fill in across the contract? Within X number of days, Got to kind of coordinate that, right? You know? And you know, one of the most important things, I'll say now, I've been saying it for years, I absolutely despise the T-47 document that will accept an old survey. That is a Texas Department of Insurance document. You know what it says? The seller, to the best of our knowledge, don't know that anything's ever happened since 1923. That's no good. That's not a standard. I've never done a single brokerage deal without a brand new survey, period. But you can't do a survey without a commitment for title insurance. Surveyor's not going to go dig that up. And I have a new class that someone asked me to write. It's only our class for lunch about brokers' relationships to Schedule B of the title commitment, the commitment for title insurance. It is the most valuable part of our work, I think. Thank goodness for the title companies. Now, again, we don't have any obligation to interpret those documents that are in Schedule B or even Schedule C, but we do have to help our clients find them and look at them. Most good title companies, when they give you a commitment for title insurance, will give you a copy of every single document mentioned in Schedule B, right? It's really, really important. I was lucky. I'll give you an example of that. I was asked, and I served for the Texas Department of Parks and Wildlife to be their water expert for when they tried to save Fairfield State Park in Fairfield, Texas. It was a state park we had leased. It was on about a 3,000 acre lake on 5,000 acre land that one of these big power companies were going to sell. We had leased it. And I was sitting in the meeting, and I said, wait just a second, guys. And they're lawyers and some fancy, nice guy, lawyer from Houston on a screen. I said, do we have a survey yet? Oh, that's a good idea. Let's get a survey. I'll call them up now. I said, whoa. Do we have a commitment for title insurance? Well, what's that? said, well, the surveyor can't work without it. Well, why do we need that? Well, there might be a couple of pages of easements, because we know there's an oil and gas well or two on it. There's some easements that probably go back to ancient times. It could be blanket easements. Well, they did that. We got the commitment for title insurance. You know how many pages of easements and other things were on Schedule B? 11. 11. I stepped up and said, okay, we're going to go through this process because Bucky guy, Beaver Alpin, wants to do this. But for $104 million that we want to buy, you can sure buy a lot of great ranches without a half silted up lake with a 50-year-old dam that we'd be responsible for. Anyhow, so it's just, I digress about that, but I can't tell you how important it is to get to know a surveyor. And in the heart, sometimes we'll go through these periods in Texas where the surveyors are so busy. You know who gets the surveyor to work for them? When we go out and take them to lunch, buy them Christmas gifts, and get to know them, right? Because they're, to me, I'm not going to try to sell something that I don't know what I'm selling. Okay, that's not really about this part of the contract, but I want to press that every time. All right. If buyer does not receive the seller water disclosure, buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to the closing, and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. And you know the old story, the title company's going to make everybody sign off that refund anyway. If seller delivers the seller's water disclosure, the buyer may terminate the contract for any reason within 7 days after the seller receives the water disclosure or prior to closing, whichever first occurs. And the earnest money will be refunded. If seller delivers the seller's water disclosure, buyer will terminate this contract for any reason within 7 days. Some reason that's from the Trek site today, and that's all, they've got it screwed up. Number 3, seller is not required to deliver the seller's water disclosure to buyer because all the following are true, and it means all 5. Seller is not aware of a water well on the property in use or not in use. Well, you know, if you're selling a residential lot, that's probably the case. 2, seller is not aware of a pond, lake, or water tank on the property. Now, I actually went through about 6 months of arguing about whether or not we should have the water. No, who knows what a tank is? Everybody knows what a stock tank is, right? I never could figure out that. A lawyer argued me about that. C, seller is not aware of any certificate of adjudication, certified filing, or permit, all the 3 things that allows them for surface water rights associated with the property administered by the TCEQ. Okay? Surface water is owned by the state of Texas. It's regulated by the TCEQ, who passes some of that authority on to the river authorities, LCRA, Trinity River Authority, et cetera. Okay? That comes from a long process. And before 1967, we had the Texas Water Rights Commission, and it goes all the way back, its history back in the 1870s. And we were having battles, especially in the valley, between riparian rights and appropriative rights. We have adopted the appropriate right program that's first in time is first in right and surface water. Whoever gets the first permit, the earliest surface permit, you have to let the water go through to them, even if you're junior to them. It's a huge argument, okay? And most people realize if you have a permit to draw water from a surface stream, a water course in Texas, that's worth a bunch of money, right? For irrigation purposes. You're supposed to file a water use report with it. And so likely the seller will know whether or not they've got a water right permit. Now, here's what happens. Well, Granddad passed away, and we've got a bunch of cousins here. We've never even been on this property. We don't know if there's a water right or not. Well, you can go to the TCEQ site and click through and find a giant spreadsheet of water rights. There are over 10,000. It'll tell you the priority date, what the use is, what county it's in, and who owns it. It'll be as simple a thing as maybe Bill Smith on the Brazos River has the right to draw 10 acre-feet a year for irrigation purposes. But you can find that out. Again, most sellers are going to be aware of that. Again, this is the third of the all that will eliminate the requirement for a water notice. C, seller is not aware that any groundwater rights to the property have been severed, sold, or leased in whole or in part. Do you know the first time water rights were severed in what's now the state of Texas was in 1772 in Villa Bayr on the San Antonio River when Geronimo Flores' mother sold her house and they held back the water right. We were severing water rights long before, I say we were severing water rights long before mineral rights, okay? Because water's that important. If you look at the old, read my book, Spanish Water, Anglo Water, San Antonio is ground zero of water, but in the Spanish maps, you'll see little bacon strip lots tied to the acequias, the ditches, or to the water, because they knew water was critical to everything in the Spanish world. That's why in Villa Behar, from 1700 on, 1710, they sometimes had 3 crops because of the way they had 50 miles of those acequias dug by hand by Franciscans without a transit. If anybody wants to go down there, I'll take you through the whole thing. You'd be amazed by it. The property receives water only from the following municipality: Midland, Municipal Utility District, Travis County WCID number 2, any special district, water supply corporation, or private water supply company. If all those 5 things are true, the seller does not have to provide a water notice, okay? And that's going to apply a lot of times in especially what residential brokers are doing. Okay. Again, this is only a disclosure notice to help the buyer understand in advance what they're buying. Now here's the water notice. Again, seller's disclosure. You'll notice the language is very similar to our seller's disclosure notice. It's, I think, Texas Associated Realtors Form 1406. The notice is a disclosure of seller's knowledge about groundwater and surface water rights on the property as of the date signed by seller, and it's not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the buyer may wish to obtain. It is not a warranty of any kind by seller or seller's agent. That's been in our disclosure notices for decades. And when of my 800 and, I guess, 20, I got hired on one yesterday, 26 cases in court, half are defending or going against brokers. Mostly I'm 70% defending brokers now. Right off the bat, that very language is what I'll refer to. This is not a broker's notice, okay? Write this down too, again, diverting a little bit. 1101.803 of the Occupation Code says that a broker is responsible for the actions of their sales agent. 1101.805 is a great get out of jail free because it says that the broker is not responsible for a misrepresentation made by the seller unless the broker has actual knowledge of it. So, again, the reason this is designed this way is to fit. I don't like rewriting things that are already in place. Concerning the property, address, definitions. Groundwater means water percolating below the surface of the earth. Groundwater is usually found in subsurface reservoirs or aquifers and is accessed by water wells. No, unless severed from the surface estate, groundwater is owned by the surface landowner who may be able to access the groundwater by drilling a water well in compliance with law and rules of the applicable groundwater district, if any. I want them to say groundwater conservation district. They tried to save a word, okay? What is a groundwater district? It is a groundwater conservation district. The one close to you is the Permian Basin underground water conservation district, right? And these districts, for example, in Uvalde, the Uvalde district has responsibility for the aquifers above and below the Edwards Aquifer. They don't have jurisdiction over the Edwards Aquifer, which is the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Groundwater district means a local or a regional groundwater conservation district, underground water conservation district, subsidence district, or other special district or authority that regulates the drilling or operation of water wells. And they added this because I want not all land in Texas subject to a groundwater conservation district, which I think is an irresponsible decision. We want local control, but take it from me, the moment we discover that there's a data center going into a county without a groundwater district, that county wants a groundwater conservation district. I think it's important. Now, I'll give you another radical opinion. In 1949, Senator A.M. Aiken passed a bill to consolidate school districts in Texas. It went down from 4,000-something districts down to 1,600. You know how much that improved the education of the people in Texas? We ought to consolidate groundwater conservation districts now so that you don't have districts all set up on county lines. Because water ignores political boundaries, right? Go back to the way it originally was designed, was to have the district coterminous with the aquifer beneath it. Surface water means water in lakes, rivers, creeks, or streams, and in bays, estuaries, and arms of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, under the law, it's a water course. A water course is something that has a bed and bank, has a permanent source of supply, but may be intermittent. That kind of covers pretty much every surface stream in Texas. Now, I don't care who owns the bed and banks of that stream. The water in that stream is owned by the state of Texas. If you're going to use it for something other than drinking water, then you need to have a permit, right? Just keep that in mind. Navigable streams and non-navigable streams are important concepts. Won't get into it today, but don't worry about that aspect. Water in a water course or a creek or a stream or a river is owned by the state of Texas. That's all you got to tell your client. Surface water rights means a permit, certified filing, or certificate of adjudication, okay? You can get a permit. In the old days, you could just do a certified filing in the 1890s. I'm going to write a certified, say that I get to use X amount of water out of the Colorado River and give it to the county. That's what they're talking about, and we honored that. One beautiful thing about Texas, we honor historical rights. Why should you put a meter on your domestic livestock well? I had some big arguments with that when I did the Lone Star Water Conference for 7 years in Brenham. This giant farmer would come after me every time after that all-day session. He had hands as big as a catcher's mitt. He was wearing overalls. He said, "You're crazy. I'm never going to put a water well meter on my well because they'll charge me for my water." The last session we had, he came up and apologized, said, "You know, it finally got through my thick head. If I don't have some kind of evidence of what I take out of this water well, if they change the rules, I will have to abide by those rules. If I have the historical evidence," and listen, folks, y'all know this, if you have notes and you're in a lawsuit and you keep those notes and put them into the court or bring them up as an exhibit, they have just as much value as a certified filing from the county courthouse, right? So I would encourage everybody to put a water meter on their wells and keep even pencil records. The best meters are done in the Edwards Aquifer Authority. They're $800. You can calibrate them. I mean, things are going to change in the next 5 years unless these droughts stop. And if you look at history, we're always in drought in Texas. It's just around the corner. Especially, y'all around here always in a drought because when you get water, it evaporates, just like Carl said. Not all diversions, impoundments, or use of surface water will require a surface water right. That's true. If you have an old riparian right, which there are very few left, or if you want to go down and drink water out of Cibolo Creek or the river, which I would not advise, and have your livestock go down there, you don't need a permit, right? It's domestic livestock use. Water well means an artificial excavation that is drilled or dug for the purpose of exploring for or producing groundwater. Now you get into some real interesting situations. Some people you may have seen big rock quarries around Texas that once they either drill too deep and it explodes and they get groundwater. One up here, up toward Weatherford, there's a whole series of quarries that quit operating and the water is just beautiful. It's gorgeous, precious water. Well, that's groundwater, but if you're in a groundwater district, you still have to you have to have a permit to transfer it outside of domestic livestock use. Note, the drilling and operation of a water well may be regulated, restricted, or prohibited in a groundwater conservation district. Subdividing a property may impact rights related to drilling or operating a water well. A water well may be owned and operated by individuals, groups, cooperatives, associations, or other entities. Again, we're just asking people, the seller, to think about telling the whole truth about where that water's coming from in a water well. All right. Information related to groundwater and water wells. Attach additional sheets as necessary. Any portion of groundwater district, if known, note the website if they got one, the seller aware of any one or more water wells on the property, yes or no, and the next 4 questions are, well, the number of water wells. You know how many abandoned water wells are in the state of Texas? An estimate, over 2 million. And in many counties, if you don't have that abandoned well covered up, it's a Class C misdemeanor. You don't want people falling in wells. And there are some ancient wells around, especially on the banks of old rivers, because the settlers would come in when the river or creek dried up. They dug a well so many feet deep because the underflow of that creek is in alluvial soils. There's still water there, so you've got to be paying attention to that. If the answer to B is yes, complete the following to extent known. All water wells are owned or operated solely by the seller for the sole benefit of the seller. The next question is number 2. You tell whoever may benefit from the water, if it's not you, who owns the wells, any kind of agreement, understanding, those kind of things. And I'm telling you right now, if you're looking at properties that have shared water wells, tell your buyer, if you're the buyer's rep, and if you're listening, tell the seller, get some kind of agreement about how that well is managed, who pays the electricity bill, and if there's any piping from that well someplace else, there ought to be an easement, or you're going to get in trouble. If your parents are dentists from Dallas, I don't mean to offend them, but I'm telling you, this person that comes down there, they'll know what they're doing. They'll find a way to have a little argument about that. Okay, you probably don't need me to read all this to you. I mean, you can read. But we really worked hard to get this right, okay? And we're just the goal is to do our best to help the seller realize what they're selling and the buyer realize what risks they take when they're buying, okay? Again, water renders land its value. And I think one of your areas here doesn't have a groundwater conservation district, right? When it pops in, it's going to change everything, all right? The last thing it says, F's important. Have the groundwater rights been severed, sold, or leased? And that's something that ought to be known. Again, if you're that third cousin coming in to take grandpa's property, you've never been on it, you may not know that, right? How many of you done a farm and ranch property where when you get off your rear end and walk the property in August when it's 107, you'll see in the back this tire tracks that go right through 2 gates, but doesn't show up on the survey. Well, grandpa let old Bill Smith next door drive through there. So that's something that's part of the thing we have to do. If you're a farm and ranch broker, you got to walk every inch of that property. Is it fun to walk a 5,000-acre tract in Rock Springs on August 17th? No. But that's part of our duty to understand what we've got. Mainly because, I tell you, I've got a good friend who was a past Texas Supreme Court justice. He owns a really beautiful place. You know where they put their trash? They dug a hole kind of at the bottom of the hill, 20 foot deep, no fences around it, where they burn their trash. I said, I almost said his name. I said, so-and-so, do you know what a hazard that is for you? He put up a fence. But how many of y'all walked around these old tracks where you've got there's a ditch there, and what have they done? They've thrown old refrigerators and stuff in there to stop the erosion. Who knows what's in there? Because people used to use all kind of products at farms and ranches to kill the bugs, stuff that's probably not legal anymore. Okay, enough about that. Same thing, information about surface water. It's a little bit easier, okay? And then we've got the typical notices to buyer and seller, kind of a general idea. The most important thing, treat this like a seller's disclosure notice if, again, the seller has to disclose it unless those 5 things are in occurrence. I'll end with this, and I hope you'll ask me some questions. If not, it's okay. But look what we always say on these forms, and this is something nobody reads. This form has been approved by the Texas Real Estate Commission. I love all my friends at the Real Estate Commission. I worked on a bunch of committees. For use with similarly approved or promulgated contract forms. I had somebody say, well, what's a promulgated form? That means you got to use it, right? Unless you have a lawyer. Such approval relates to this form only. Here's the great one. No representation is made as to the legal validity or adequacy of any such provision. So we got to use it, but they're telling you, be real careful using it, right? I want to encourage you, before I turn over questions, in the world we live in right now, where you've got lawyers still on the prowl looking for someone to sue in these deals, they'll sue the agent because they know that the insurance companies don't have the courage to go up in front of a jury. Hence our $1.8 billion stupid judgment 2 summers ago. It's really important that you pay attention to these things. All right. This goes into effect July 1, okay? And I go back to the most important part that you look at. That's 3. When a seller is not required to deliver the water notice, disclosure notice to the buyer. All right. We're going to end a little earlier today, I think, but we've been ahead, which is wonderful. Anybody have any questions about this? Oh, this is great. Yes? Because all out through Texas legal history, we honor historical uses. You can have a historical building permit, a historical water permit. Even when the rules change, they'll honor what you've used in that permit. That's because we're very, very fair people, contrary to what people may think elsewhere. So that's why it'd be better to have you may only read the meter once a year, but when they change the rules on you, they don't have any evidence. You've got evidence of what you use, and don't lie about it. But I mean, see what I'm saying? You'll have, and it's not that big a deal to do it. I just think that, first time, I'm not a climate change fella. I've seen the maps. We go up and down in Texas. But I have not worn a sweater to a Texas football game since I was 12. And so maybe that's because we're so stupid that we don't put them at night when it's 400 degrees. Bottom line is, we're going to have more trouble about water. There are going to be more things that will happen regulation-wise, right? And someday down the road, there could be something that could really affect you. So, to me, every farmer cherishes water, right? We all need to do that. Other questions? Yes?
Okay, so it's fairly common now because the quality of the agents and the professionalism has really gone down over the last 5 to 10 years. But it's common to see where basically the listing agent will say, oh, well, you need to verify this and verify this and verify this because they don't do any homework at all. What's your response to something like that?
Well, one of the things that we've got a problem with, when we changed the contract to include that disclosure about oak wilt and stuff, we did that and broke the lawyer, because on farm and ranch, there's really no obligation to have any kind of disclosure notice, okay? We all said, well, we need to have some minimum disclosure notice there. But here's the problem with this. You're making the contract offer, that the buyer is, but the seller needs to fill that part out, right? So I know what you're saying. I think that, to me, if a listing agent has an obligation, a fiduciary duty, to be scrupulous, meticulous. If you look in the version I wrote, it defines scrupulous, meticulous. We didn't change, we put in the Code of Esther Real Estate Commission in 1976, probably after the Sharpstown scandal. We didn't change it until 2019. But we didn't talk about the definition of scrupulous and meticulous until 2010 in our legal 162 manual. And it talks about scrupulous means you've got a moral obligation to do things right for a client. Meticulous means, and the definition is scary. Article 2003 about it. You have to exercise extreme caution and care for the client. How do you defend that? And we put it back in again. So I think that I've answered your question a long way around. You've got a listing agent that's not doing their job that talks to me about how we don't make it hard enough for people to get a license.
Doesn't have anything to do with that.
But here's what we did. I'm chairman of the chairman of the Education Standards Advisory Commission at TREC. And we're talking about further requirements. We get a letter from the governor, and I'll paraphrase it, 2 pages. Chelsea Buckhouse walks in, who's our great executive man, whatever it is, director. She said, Charles, look at this. Governor basically said, you need to quit being so hard on out-of-state brokers coming and doing business in Texas. I threw the papers up there. So what we did, though, was, that's why we changed to geographic competency under 531.3 competency, where you've got to prove that you've got competency to do something, right? Folks, if you're sponsoring agents, 1101.803 of the Occupation Code says you're responsible for all their actions. Now, what you need to do to avoid that is to have an independent contract agreement that says you can do residential single-family property transactions in this area only. You're not allowed to do commercial work. You're not allowed to do farm and ranch. That means the broker can say, I'm not responsible for the actions because this independent contract agreement didn't allow them to do that. But if you allow them to do farm and ranch, you need to make sure they're competent in it, right?
Theoretically, it's not happening at all.
And that's the sad thing, because Texas Realtors, Julia, all you've got to do is pay one fee for $180 or something, and they will give you those manuals and give you the guidance that you need to do that. And every year they update it. I agree with you. We talked about, I don't know how I'm really involved with Texas Alliance of Land Brokers, we talked about how we could get a license, special license, that you have to have, before you do farm and ranch, you gotta have that special license. But I'll never get that
I'm
fixed.
seeing agents that, the brokers don't even have any commercial classes, any education. They're allowing their agents, it's only been agents for a year or two, to practice
And then
commercial.
they get sued, they hire Thompson Co. to defend them, and Thompson Co. hires me. Yeah, that's good. And frankly, I mean, when I try to teach these classes, I'm probably working against my own interests, but I think it's the right thing to do. We can hold people's feet to the fire. And I think what we need to provide, y'all can hate me when I say this, more money to TREC to have more investigators. But you know what TREC does? They have to triage the complaints. And the most complaints we still get at TREC is somebody who's hired a manager or hired somebody from out of state and they've lost all their money. I was ombudsman served as ombudsman for TAR for 10 years. Fully half the complaints where somebody called and said, I'm so embarrassed, Dr. Porter, I bought 5 houses in Fort Worth. I live in LA. And I had a 1031 and I wanted to buy them. They looked pretty good on paper, and so I bought them. And I hired a property manager. She looked great too. Can you help me get my first month's rent and deposits from her? I mean, that's what TREC goes through first. I hear exactly what you're saying. And I don't know how to solve that. I think that if we continue to make it harder to have a license, I think we'll get a lot of resistance to that. But we've got a lot of uneducated people out there. Mostly it's part-time agents that get us in trouble. Those are good comments. I'll be happy to support you in any way we could figure out how to do it. I know what you're frustrated with. I can tell you how horrible it was to try to deal with some of these. When I sold the frontage of Onion Creek and the Delano tract at Bee Caves and Mopac, how many agents just didn't know something from a hole in the ground? Yes?
I think it's worth y'all knowing that whether it feels good or not, Texas actually has some of the highest licensure standards in the country.
That's right.
And so we are ahead of the game when it comes to the qualifications and all that. I actually have in my phone right now a rundown of what other states requirements from my colleagues when I put it together, since they talk about their education requirements. And when, like, even just the bare hours that y'all have to go through for your licensure is 6 times greater than the next
That's right.
closest state.
That's right.
What about that example where people going through it 1 week and done all 180 hours
Yeah.
in 1 week? How's that even possible?
Well, Brandon, I think that when I started, I think the education requirements were probably about somewhere between a half and a quarter of what they are today. I think the ease of getting your hours knocked out, we've all been there. I think the ease of getting your hours knocked out is there, but maybe the quality and the substance of the education that we get and receive are not quite there. And maybe that does boil down to, maybe we do need to put more onus back with the brokers on what they're directing and doing with their agents, but
You're right.
the education piece as well, we could do better.
And members, Trek stepped back and said the qualification of the instructor is now up to the provider. And that's a change. And so we need to make our providers' feet hold them to the fire. Anyhow, those are great questions. Anything else about water and this notice? Yes. That's a great, we talked about that. And the condition of water is supposedly involved with TCEQ and other local air agencies. Question is, a broker, should we have the water tested in a groundwater well? I bought my farm, the first thing I did was, you get a bottle of water, and you take it to somebody, and pay $45, they'll tell you what's in it. I was rather worried about what was in it, frankly. So I drink bottled water. I drilled another one that's even more salty and full of stuff. That's a good point. We're not there yet, but I think it would be a good idea for it, if you're a buyer's agent, to go out there and say, okay, here's the water wells, we're dependent on that totally, let's in our feasibility period test that water. And it can be done. Great question. Any others?
What's the best way for agents to educate our buyers and our sellers on these groundwater districts and things without unintentionally stepping into legal interpretation?
I think you want to tell them, first of all, that you're in a groundwater conservation district, and then refer them to that district's website, and, or, what I do a lot, and it's great because most groundwater conservation districts are rural folks, take them over to meet the groundwater conservation district manager. I got a friend the other day who's trying to do water deals, and I admire him so much, because he said, I want to do something in Brazos Valley, all these questions. I said, well, Richard, go talk to Alan Day, the general manager. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He got in his truck and drove over there and had a meeting with him at 4. The groundwater conservation district managers are very supportive of our questions. That's one way to do it. But you hit it on the head. Do not interpret those rules. You can give them a copy of the rules and advise them. The most common phrase in our contracts is one phrase: consult an attorney. Advise them to consult an attorney. And just don't get involved in any of the interpretation. Just say, I can't do it because my license won't allow me. Good question. Anybody else? Okey doke. Thank y'all. Make sure I get it right.
Hold on, don't leave yet.
Don't leave yet.
No, a very, very special presentation from our president. I'm just lying, but I did want to remind you guys before you head out, we have a lot of extra food. So if you want to feed your family tonight, there you go. Lots of tuna. If we've got any tuna fans in the house, lots of tuna if you want to grab one. I am going to turn it over to our president, Laura Camp, just to do some final closings. But I wanted to say thank you. Having a crowd like this for something that is so important, not just to our clients and not just to our industry, but to our community as a whole, speaks a lot to your professionalism. And I'm just so thankful for your time today. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Laura.
All right, I won't keep you guys long. I just have a list of real quick thank yous. Thank you first to everybody for attending today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to show up and learn and stay informed. And then I want to also thank the speakers. We appreciate you coming to Midland and your willingness to share your expertise. And then thank you to the Governmental Affairs Committee and specifically Kelsey for all the hard work that you put into making today a success. And then we can clap for Kelsey and the Governmental Affairs. And then just a reminder to everybody, we're getting you out a few minutes early, so take this time and go early vote. Thank you. Bye.